on the floor. I don't want to be on the floor. Let's put it on the floor and we get a picture. I'll come down too. Do one here.
The Washington Post newsroom delivers breaking events around the world as they happen. Unrivaled reporting from the journalists you've come to trust. To get the facts fast and meet the challenges of today head on. Get the news that matters most with a special offer by visiting WashingtonPost.com/watch. Subscribing unlocks instant access, bringing you the Post's award-winning coverage anytime, any place. Because democracy dies in darkness.
The threat that Trump poses is greater in his second term than his first.
Joe Biden failed on the border. He failed on inflation.
When he lost in 2020, something literally snapped in the sky. That's why January 6th happened, when he unleashed an insurrection.
High prices, high interest rates, high mortgage rates, and death for the American dream.
Our economy is the envy of the world. Unemployment hit a 50-year low.
If we don't win, this country is finished. I really believe that. I think it's finished.
They found Donald Trump guilty on all 34 felony counts.
They're not after me, they're after you, and I just happen to be standing in their way.
There's more to do, so let's finish the job.
This November, Biden, you're fired. Get out of here.
Tonight, President Joe Biden and former President Donald Trump face off. The candidates hope to prove that they have the ability and the temperament to lead the nation, and that their opponent does not. The Washington Post will bring you tonight's CNN Debate Live simulcast here with our reporting and analysis. I'm Libby Casey in the Post newsroom. Good evening. Well, tonight's high-stakes debate makes history. It's the earliest ever televised general election debate. It's the first onstage confrontation between a sitting president and a former president. And these are the two oldest major party nominees ever. The debate starts in an hour, and we are with you until then with the latest reporting. I'm joined live in our studios by columnist James Hohmann and senior video journalist J.M. Rieger. Senior politics correspondent Rhonda Colvin is live at the site of the CNN debate in Atlanta, where we begin our coverage. Rhonda, set the scene for us where you are.
That's right, Libby. We are here in Atlanta at the complex near the hall where these two candidates will be debating shortly. I'm in the area where journalists from around the world have gathered to watch this, to cover it, to be here after it, to give analysis. It's a pretty exciting energy that's happening here right now in Atlanta. Behind me, I don't know if you can see, this is the floor to the spin room. Typically, that is where candidates will send surrogates at the end of the night, campaign aides to meet with media, tell media who won, what they thought the knockout moments were. But what's interesting about tonight is I've been walking the floor, and there are already surrogates here. For instance, we've seen California Governor Gavin Newsom come here and talk to reporters at length for probably over an hour discussing his expectations for Biden. We've also seen Congressman Byron Donalds, Vivek Ramaswamy, two men who might be considered for the VP pick for the former President Donald Trump. One reporter's observation that I have had is in listening to these conversations, particularly with Republicans, they are very measured tonight. I'm hearing them discuss policy specifics. They're not really being very combative, and I'm wondering, is that giving us a window into how the former president might be conducting himself tonight? And I also want to give you a little bit of a sense of the energy here in Atlanta. We've been here since yesterday talking to people, average people on the street, our Lyft and Uber drivers, the people at the hotel. A lot of people are tuning into this. A lot of people said, this is kind of the ticket of the week, that they wish they could be here, and they're all going to watch. So you're also, seeing that people are really anticipating what's going to happen tonight, even though no one really has answers yet. That's the other thing that we are sensing, is that everyone is really anticipating, but no one knows what's going to happen. So, of course, we'll be here through the night to provide analysis and watch this spin room floor. But so far, it's a pretty interesting night.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Rhonda. James, let's pick up right where Rhonda left off. We do not know what tonight holds. And, we're politics junkies. This is the Washington Post. We live for nights like this. But there is a lot on the line for both of these candidates tonight in a palpable way that I think we're really feeling.
Yeah, and it really does feel like President Biden needs to change the trajectory of the race with tonight's debate. There aren't going to be many opportunities this year. It's an incredibly tight contest. The Washington Post polling average right now shows that Donald Trump is leading in 6 of the 7 battleground states. You can see that on the screen, that are most likely to determine the outcome of the election. Biden pushed for an early debate. We haven't even had the party nominating conventions yet, but he sees this as an opportunity to show Americans that this is their choice. A majority of people still aren't fully kind of settled with the idea that Donald Trump and Joe Biden are going to have this rematch, but they are. And a majority of Americans aren't satisfied with their choices. But Donald Trump and Joe Biden are the candidates. And Joe Biden wants this to be a referendum on Trump and Trumpism. And he hopes to use this debate to sort of change the whole structure of the race going into the final few months.
That is a high-stakes proposition because if you have big potential to gain and change the narrative, JM, you also have big potential to fail. Does Donald Trump also have that kind of pressure on him?
Yes. This is high stakes for both candidates because, as James mentioned, the potential here to alter the trajectory of the race, to change voter sentiment right now. We know that these are two of the most unpopular candidates in a general election contest in U.S. history. That is a high bar for both of these candidates going into tonight to try to change that a little bit, to try to win the sliver of undecided or quote-unquote persuadable voters over to their side. And as you mentioned off the top, Libby, we're really in uncharted waters in so many ways. One caveat I will make, though, is because this debate is so early, because it's before the conventions, because there's another presidential debate still to happen in September, and even though we might have one of the most watched presidential debates in U.S. history tonight, there is a chance that if either of these candidates stumble, there's plenty of time here, over 4 months until the general election, for them to recover. So while it simultaneously might be one of the most consequential presidential debates in U.S. history, there's also the potential that it might be less consequential depending on what happens tonight.
Yeah, I mean, it's just going to be so interesting to see what unfolds. And we'll talk in a little bit about just how this debate will go and what the groundwork and what the ground rules are. But first, let's head back to Atlanta and Rhonda, who is in the spin room with one of our colleagues, Marianne Levine, a national political reporter focused on the elections who's been closely covering Donald Trump. Rhonda.
That's right. I'm with our colleague, Marianne. Marianne, you have a sense of how Donald Trump has been preparing for this. Can you give us an idea of what type of Donald Trump may appear on that stage tonight?
Well, I think Trump's allies are hoping that he's really going to focus on issues like inflation, immigration, and try to make the case that that the United States was better under his presidency versus Biden's. Now, Trump is unpredictable, so we'll see whether or not he'll deliver that message and whether or not he can make it more about the policy versus his own personal grievances.
Now, we've done a lot of reporting at the Post and elsewhere saying that the former president is sort of, his style is off the cuff. Mm-hmm. Is his campaign worried about that even if he is trying to go into this measured, that, he might flip out and, make this the angry Trump that we quite often see?
I think the campaign right now is really trying to project confidence, and they're trying to say that, that they're the one, that Biden is going to be the one on the defense. So right now it seems like they're preparing Trump, but not necessarily in the formal ways that Biden is preparing. Like that Trump has been having these informal policy sessions, so kind of going with that off-the-cuff type style. He's not going through as formal preparation as Biden is, it seems like. But I think right now the campaign is trying to project confidence going into tonight. Now, those who are familiar with the former president say that he's unpredictable, but I think that at least the signal that we're getting from the campaign itself is they're trying to signal confidence ahead of the debate.
And of course, this debate is happening amidst his recent conviction in New York. The other cases, we're waiting for a Supreme Court decision as well that would apply to him. Has the campaign given a sense of how they might approach questions about the conviction, questions about criminal charges?
I think we're going to see a very similar message to what we see on the campaign trail, where Trump has continued to make this allegation that the judicial system is weaponized against him. And I think that that's probably the main message we're going to keep seeing. But I think the question is, how much does Trump actually focus on that, and how much does he make this about himself versus the policies that voters want to hear about? So I think that's a big question going into tonight.
All right, Marianne, thank you so much. We'll see you later. Thank you. Back to you guys in D.C.
Thanks, Rhonda. JM, so let's pick up there. Can Donald Trump focus on issues larger than himself, or will he focus on himself? We're hearing from a lot of his advisors, a lot of Republican operatives who are on all the networks, taking all of our calls, saying it's like they're trying to talk to him. They're like, just be presidential, just be a grown-up, just stay on the issues. But we will see if Donald Trump has the control and discipline to do that.
That's one of the key questions tonight, is can Trump stay on message? We know that Trump told his campaign aides after that first debate in 2020 against President Biden that he felt like he went too hard, too much for the jugular, if you will, in that debate. We remember, some of our viewers might remember the constant interruptions. At one point, President Biden turned to him and said, "Will you just shut up, man?" A key moment out of that debate, and there was a lot of perception afterwards that was kind of the moment in which that Biden, quote unquote, kind of won or swung that his way because of how Trump came out. So, yes, if you're the Trump campaign tonight, if you're Trump, you want to come in and you don't want to take, if Biden baits you, you want to stay above the fray, you want to focus on the issues, you want to make this a referendum on the past 3.5 years here of the Biden administration. And that's something that we're going to hear kind of throughout the night, I'm sure, and is going to be kind of a key framework of which to watch this debate tonight. Is Biden wants to make this a choice, a binary choice. between him and Trump and wants to rely on that sort of anti-Trump vote, if you will, to kind of propel him to a second term. Trump wants to make this a referendum on Biden.
James, how does Joe Biden try to use Trump against himself? I'm sure the Biden campaign would love nothing more, frankly, than to hit play of one of Trump's own rallies to represent candidate Trump, because his rallies are a stream of conscious. He often gives shout outs at the beginning and like an homage to the January 6th accused and convicted who he thinks of as like political prisoners. And he says things that are very extreme when it comes to immigrants. He's taking credit for Roe v. Wade. But Biden doesn't have control over what Trump he gets tonight. How is the campaign thinking about trying to draw out that contrast?
Donald Trump has a record. Because this is that unique first time where you have a current and a former president running against each other, it's not just rhetoric. It's not just what Trump says he'd do as president. He said he would build the wall. He actually has 4 years. So the Biden game plan is to say, you raised the national debt by $8 trillion when you were president. You said you would build the wall. You didn't. January 6th happened on your watch. And to just keep pivoting back to try to make it about Trump and highlight his actual record. Both of these guys are basically interviewing for a second term. And I think Biden has to outline a vision for what he would do in a second term. But his primary focus is going to be warning in a non-abstract way what a second Trump term would look like for people who maybe are looking back 4 years with rose-colored glasses.
Rhonda, from there on the ground, what are the surrogates and the campaigns telling you about their goal for tonight?
Well, what we're seeing is that both campaigns are using this moment, this debate, to shine a light on where they want to take their campaigns next. For Biden, we have seen that he has been sending surrogates in a very strategic manner across the nation, but also here. Yesterday, there was an interesting press conference where Jeff Duncan, the former lieutenant governor, Republican lieutenant governor of Georgia, endorsed Biden. He was with Adam Kinzinger, who is a former member of the House, who was a Republican and was on the January 6th Select Committee. Both of them talked about Donald Trump being a danger, tying him back to January 6th. They were there with a Capitol police officer who was there that day on January 6th. So the Biden campaign seems to want to use all of the tools at their disposal to show that Trump is who he was on January 6th. They also want to show that he is not the candidate for reproductive rights. The Biden campaign is sending out surrogates this week to discuss the fact that we are a few days out from the second year anniversary of the Dobbs decision, which repealed Roe v. Wade. So they want to make sure that they are hitting Trump on very specific issues that are really hard for the Republican Party to explain away, January 6th and reproductive rights. On the Trump side, what we've been seeing here is that they are focusing on black voters specifically in the Atlanta metro area. Yesterday, the Trump campaign had a roundtable with black business leaders. They also had what's being called the Congress Cognac and Cigars event with Byron Donalds and also another black male House member in Congress. And they're trying to bring together members of the black community in the area to take a look at the Republican Party. We've had some good reporting. Some of our colleagues have been reporting on that event as well. So both campaigns seem to want to use this night as not just the debate, but basically a larger springboard to start making this campaign something that either can win on.
Who the campaigns are reaching out to right now, James, what does that tell you about their larger strategies and their hopes?
What Rhonda's talking about is hugely important. Remember, Georgia was decided by 10,000 votes. So if Trump can figure out a way to peel off 10% of African-American men with events like that, it could make the difference in this race. Biden's challenge is trying to recreate the coalition that got him 81 million votes in 2020. And right now, that coalition is not particularly excited. Polls show not just that he's trailing, but that a lot of his supporters haven't come home yet. Younger voters, Gen Z, Hispanics, African Americans, college-educated women, and there's a variety of different factors at play. But Biden is not just trying to get people to vote against Trump, he's trying to get people to vote at all. to explain that there actually is a contrast, that it is worth showing up. We're in this weird scenario where after a huge increase from 2016 to 2020, we might actually see turnout drop off if the polls are any indication. The percentage of people who say they're closely following the election, much lower than it was at this point 4 years ago. And so one of the reasons Biden wanted the early debate was to kind of get people focused on this election, get people tuned in, get them to understand the choice. As Biden always says, and I'm sure he'll say it tonight, don't compare me to the almighty, compare me to the alternative. And that if Biden is doing his job will be sort of what comes out of tonight.
You talked about why President Biden wanted this debate tonight. Why did former President Trump want this debate?
I think there's a couple reasons. One is Trump was out there saying he wanted to debate Biden, and Biden essentially called his bluff and said, Trump said, I'll debate anywhere, anytime. If Trump had been left to his own devices, he wouldn't have wanted to debate on CNN. He would have wanted a studio audience. He wouldn't want the mics muted. These things, I actually think the conventional wisdom might be wrong. In the grand scheme of things, they don't traditionally play to Trump's strengths. I actually think they might make him seem more disciplined because it will be more controlling. But essentially, Trump got rolled into this. There are people in his inner circle who feel frustrated that Trump basically, by saying he would debate Biden anywhere, anytime, got pushed into doing it this particular way. One of the other reasons that I think Trump is fine with an earlier debate is that both candidates are going to be rusty tonight. I mean, normally, what always happens in presidential debates, going back in the modern era, is the sitting incumbent president struggles in the first debate. Remember Barack Obama in 2012, George W. Bush in 2004. And it's because they're not used to being challenged. But part of it is that the challenger has usually had a bunch of primary debates.
They're battle tested.
And so they've gotten the reps in. And in this case, Trump does a lot of rallies. But he didn't ever debate Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley. And so what would normally be an advantage for the challenger.
He sat out of the whole GOP primary process this year.
So neither of them has the sort of fresh debate experience. The last time either of them debated was with each other in October of 2020.
Let's go back to the spin room in Atlanta and Rhonda Colvin, who is with our Washington Post White House Bureau Chief, Tolu Olorunnipa. Rhonda, good to see you both.
Yes, that's right. I'm with our colleague, Tolu. Tolu, you have your ear on the ground when it comes to the Biden campaign and the White House, obviously. Tell us a little bit about how the Biden campaign wants this night to end. What do they want to hit, and what do they want everybody talking about after this is over tonight?
I'd say the key word is energy. They want people to say that Biden had energy throughout the night, that he was strong, that he looked forceful, that he looked like he could be president for another 4 years. He's 81 years old. At the end of a second term, he'd be 86. And they want him to show that he has the stamina to not only run a campaign and sort of put to rest some of the jitters that you're seeing among Democrats, but also for moderate voters, for some Republicans that are thinking about voting for him, give them a sense of assurance that he would be able to not only run a campaign against Donald Trump, but also run the presidency for another 4 years. And so they want to hit their spots against Donald Trump, make the case that Donald Trump is unfit for the presidency, but they also want to make a proactive case for Joe Biden, that he's strong, that he's energetic, that he is not the bumbling, old, tired person that the Republicans have called him, that he would be able to clear that bar and make it very clear to the American people that that is an image that does not line up with the reality, and then move forward in the rest of the campaign as a strong candidate for 2024.
You know, I remember when this debate was first announced that both candidates agreed. There were congressional Democrats, there were national Democrats that were saying, you know, Biden doesn't need to do this. He should not do this because Trump is so unpredictable, and it just may not work out well for Biden, and it's hard to prepare for that. Are there specific ways his campaign, in his prep at Camp David and in the weeks ahead, that they are trying to make sure that he can meet any Trump that he might get tonight?
Well, they've been doing a lot of preparation. They've been going over Trump's past statements, going over his past debates, seeing how he performs in interviews and how he talks about different issues. And so they have prepared for a lot of different scenarios. They've prepared for the angry, dynamic Trump that comes out and tries to interrupt and tries to be boisterous. They've also prepared for the Trump that is a little bit more measured, a little bit more muted, a little bit more presidential in ways. And they've tried to showcase for the American people that not only is Trump unpredictable, but they want to make the case that Trump is worse than he was 4 years ago. He's a worse candidate. He would be a worse president if he's allowed to get back into the Oval Office. And so they are going to make the case. They're going to listen to what Trump says, but I imagine that Joe Biden will do a lot of talking directly to the camera, talking directly to the American people, sometimes even ignoring Donald Trump on the stage and making the case directly to the American people that Donald Trump should not be elected for another term in office.
There are two probably very vulnerable areas for the president to go into tonight. That's immigration, also the war in Israel. Are there areas in those issues that the campaign really wants to specifically bring home tonight? I know you've done reporting on how they might handle the immigration issue.
Yes, on immigration, they first want to point to the most recent numbers that we've seen. Earlier this week, the Department of Homeland Security said that people coming across the border, that number has gone down by 40% just since Joe Biden signed an executive action essentially restricting the asylum process at the border. And so they want to say that Joe Biden took action where Republicans and Donald Trump failed to take action. And they also want to say that Joe Biden actually wants to cause a solution on the border, while Trump just wants to use it as a political attack line. And so they're going to be trying to go on offense on immigration. And now it may be difficult because polls show that voters trust Trump more on the border and on immigration than they trust Joe Biden. But they do have numbers, they have statistics to show that things are getting better at the border, that there's less chaos, there's less of a overwhelming situation there. And so they're going to be able to point to those numbers, point to that strong action that Joe Biden has taken. And I imagine that's how they're going to try to neutralize that issue, or at least try to battle Donald Trump to a draw on the issue of immigration. We'll have to wait and see how strongly Trump comes out on that issue. But Trump has been telegraphing that he will be talking about immigration. He'll be talking about it very forcefully. He'll be attacking Joe Biden on that issue. And whether or not Joe Biden is able to respond to those attacks will determine in many ways how this debate ends up going.
And our last question for you, in past elections when we've covered Joe Biden, we've heard from his campaign that, he's gaffe prone. They're a little nervous about what might come out of his mouth. What are they nervous about tonight? What might have one of his aides, his campaign aides, kind of, nail biting as they watch this? Is there an area of weakness they're worried about?
Well, they are worried about how he comes across physically. They're worried about whether or not he stumbles over his words. He does have a history of stuttering. We have seen his ability to give a speech diminish over the course of his presidency. And so they are worried about him keeping focused on his delivery, making sure that he presents himself as a clear speaking president, someone who can hold that office and make sure that he can deliver a message directly to the American people. They are also worried about Trump interrupting Joe Biden. Even though his mic will be muted, Biden will be able to hear him when he's talking, when he's breathing heavily, when he's making gestures. And so that could throw Biden off of his game if he's making a point and Trump starts, taking, different steps to try to interrupt him. That could make it difficult for Joe Biden to get his point across. Sometimes Biden stops himself in the middle of a sentence and cuts himself off. How much more will that be a challenge when you have Donald Trump 8 feet away from you speaking and trying to interrupt? And so Biden's campaign aides are a little worried that, the delivery, even if he has the points, even if he has done the research, that the delivery might not be as strong as they practice once you get under those lights. And so they are going to be watching very closely to see whether or not Biden can stick the landing, make his points, and get out of this debate feeling strong and feeling like he did what he needed to do.
All right, Tolu, always good to talk to you. I'm going to send things back to you guys in D.C.
Thanks so much, Rhonda. With us now, Dan Baltz, chief correspondent covering national politics, the presidency, and Congress. Dan, good evening. Is tonight about proving oneself as a candidate or proving that the other guy should not be president?
Well, I think it is obviously a combination of both. I mean, each person would like to disqualify the other. That's difficult unless the other person cooperates. I think this is a debate in which both candidates have something to lose, maybe a little bit to gain. But obviously, I think the stakes are bigger for President Biden. He wanted this early debate, as everybody has said. We know the reason why, because this race has been pretty static and not particularly in a good way for President Biden. The national polls are reasonably tight, but the battleground states, the former president has the advantage. And so this current president has to do something tonight to begin to change the nature of the race. And that's not always easy. I mean, he's very well prepped. He's spent a lot of time in Camp David going over everything, as Tolu indicated a minute ago. But I think people are going to judge him by how he looks, how he sounds, the vigor, his ability to really articulate what he thinks about the world, and his ability to talk about a second term in a way that paints a positive picture. picture about the state of the country, because this country, as we all know, is in a pretty sour mood.
How much is riding on tonight, Dan? I mean, you know, the election is 4 months away, and yet both candidates were willing, one of them very eager, we know, in the case of Joe Biden, and Donald Trump said he wanted to debate, eager to get to this moment tonight. Do they have time to turn it around if they don't do well tonight?
Well, I think if somebody, I think if somebody has a disastrous night, it's going to be difficult to turn it around. But because this is the earliest debate that we've ever had in a presidential campaign, there is more time than you would normally have to recover from something. But most voters, as we know, have made up their mind. A number of the voters who haven't may not even watch this debate, and what they will see are the moments that go viral, the social media, slice and dice that both campaigns will do and that others will do. Is it a significant debate? I think it's been difficult to kind of overhype the importance of this debate, and yet we will have to let it play out and then judge it once we've seen it.
You've done reporting, Dan, on the various polls, which show the race, of course, as incredibly close. But each news outlet or pollster points to important groups, and they're all important, right? Older voters, black voters, men versus women. Can you explain the slicing and dicing of the electorate for clues that everyone is doing right now?
Well, I think the biggest groups, the most important groups that people are looking at right now are ones that have traditionally been in the Democratic camp and supported President Biden in 2020, but have slid away, and that's younger black voters and Hispanics, and particularly Hispanic men. Those are the two groups where the incumbent president is underperforming what he did in 2020. They are crucial to his success, and he's going to need to do something to bring them back. I'm not convinced that tonight's debate will solve that problem for him. That's a longer-term problem that the campaign knows about and is working on. Obviously, suburban women are always important, suburban voters in general and suburban voters, women in particular, and that's why you'll hear the president talking about abortion and what Trump did in changing the Supreme Court, which overturned Roe v. Wade, and what some of the states are doing and the threat to abortion rights in the country. So those are among the groups. One of the things we've seen, you mentioned older voters. Older voters seem to be more favorable toward Biden this time around than they were the last time. We know from all the polling that men are very favorable to Donald Trump, and women are somewhat more favorable to Biden. We know that the big divide in this country is between college-educated voters and voters who do not have a college education. So we're going to continue to, parse these polls to try to look for clues, but the polls, because of the sample sizes, are often limited in our ability to really make judgments about what's going on.
Dan Baltz, Chief Correspondent, thank you so much.
Thank you.
JM, let's talk about who the candidates are each speaking to. Dan pointed out that while this is a very high-stakes night, people are watching with us tonight. A lot of voters or potential voters will get their information tomorrow or in the coming days and weeks through social media clips, viral moments. So who does a candidate speak to tonight?
Well, I think that's one of the crucial points of tonight, Libby, which is part of the reason that these debates matter is because of how they are framed in press coverage on social media in the hours and days after the debate. Sometimes those are where the biggest moments come from and things that maybe change the momentum, if you will, of the race. And I think that is also important because what Rhonda was talking about just a moment ago in terms of what some of the Trump surrogates, they're coming in with, talking heavy on policy. They're a little more subdued. They're not as combative. That's a change from even 48, 72 hours ago when they were tossing out conspiracy theories about President Biden and how he's going to come into this debate, where they were being extremely combative, where they're challenging the objectivity and fairness of Jake Tapper and Dana Bash, who will be co-moderating this debate tonight. So they are, in some ways, already starting to play that media framing game. And that is as much a part of the equation tonight as maybe the moments that happen on that stage.
James.
It's the little things that stick with people. And it really is remarkable how even things that aren't said can end up defining these debates. It's little stuff like Melania Trump isn't there tonight, Jill Biden is. will that break through with some of these suburban women that Dan Balls was just talking about?
And one way we may see evidence of that is at the end of the debate, the candidates are allowed to bring one person, right, onto stage with them. So who will that be?
Right.
Okay.
And but you know, you think about like 2004 and 2000. In both of those debates, George W. Bush's opponents were sort of sighing and breathing. Al Gore in 2000 was like, and there was one point where Al Gore got in Bush's personal space, and Bush sort of turned to him and nodded, kind of like, so this isn't high school debate. I did high school debate. You want to be able to judge it on points, and you want to have the flow and look at who's winning on the arguments. There is no mystery about where either of these candidates stand on the issues because they have a record. And because voters feel like they kind of know both of them pretty well. So it is about temperament, and it is about looking presidential. And you know, these debates have become so much less edifying. When you go back, you know, this is not going to be the Lincoln-Douglas debates. This isn't going to be the Kennedy-Nixon debates. But even 2004, 2008, 2012, there were so many fewer interruptions. There wasn't the crosstalk. There weren't the personal attacks. And in some ways, Trump is a symptom. In other ways, he's a cause of our politics just becoming a lot nastier over the last decade.
Let's go back to Rhonda Colvin, who is in Atlanta in that spin room. The debate just a half an hour away, Rhonda, and a reminder to our viewers that we will have this simulcast live right here on this stream. Rhonda, you've been checking in with voters who were part of a large-scale Washington Post survey. Tell us more about who are these voters and what do they want out of the debate?
That's right. This is a part of our poll with George Mason University where we are tracking people we're calling deciders. These are voters who either are uncommitted, they don't show a strong leaning toward Biden or Trump, and they also may not have a very regular voting pattern. So there's sort of this slice of America that hasn't chosen a candidate yet and may be undecided. And adding to that, they live in swing states too. So these are the states that always keep us up at night, and we're continuously reporting the election throughout the days as Pennsylvania, Nevada, Arizona results come in. They're from those states. And I talked to a couple this week to find out what they wanted out of this debate. What do they want to hear from the candidates? And two things struck me. One is that the lack of enthusiasm among voters about this election is very real. People are very stressed about it. They're very ambivalent about it. Yes, they know it's coming, but it's almost as if they don't really want November to come. So they're not as enthusiastic as perhaps people have been in past cycles. And of course, we've done a lot of reporting on double unhappies and people in that portion of America. Also, I learned from them that they really want to hear about policy. They sort of are starved for it because the primary cycle as well as the general election cycle, it just hasn't had a lot of policy discussion. It's been overshadowed by all sorts of other dramas, and people at home really want to hear these candidates talk about what they will do for them. So take a listen to what these voters told me.
I care a lot about human rights specifically. So if they discuss anything about reversing Roe v. Wade or anything involving LGBT rights and kind of helping reverse some of the anti-trans legislation that's been passed over the past year, that's definitely got my vote, but it's kind of like the lesser of two evils right now because they're both not great.
For Biden, he would have to show that, tangible steps to lower costs and get some things sorted out in that kind of way, just for everyday life. And then for Trump, I think that we need to hear some tangible and specific actionable points that aren't all his personal vendetta.
So those two sort of represent what a lot of those who have been surveyed are saying. They want to hear more policy discussion. But even though that they will be watching tonight, those two voters told me they would be watching tonight, they also feel like they already know these two candidates very well. And, it just helps with the angst of deciding to vote, whether or not to vote in November. And that also underscores how important a night like this is, because we know from covering past debates, past election cycles, that debates really can help bring momentum, kind of make a bit of a turn for the candidate. Now, again, we are, a few months out from November, and really anything can happen. But this night is important to a lot of voters who just don't seem to know what to do with this race.
Thank you, Rhonda. James, let's talk about those voters that Rhonda spoke to. Isabel, the first person, was saying things that would make her a Joe Biden voter, pretty clear cut. But yet we're hearing reluctance and disinterest in supporting him as a candidate. What are the polls and what are your conversations telling you about the core of that issue?
If Joe Biden was 10 years younger, he would be winning this election. It would still be close, but a lot of it is that people don't feel that he has the energy to govern and the stamina to finish this job for 4 more years. He presents old. He's only 3 years older. Trump just turned 78 last week. He's only 81. But it comes up when I talk to voters, when I talk to strategists. It obviously is a top concern of people at the White House. It is this huge liability that people just aren't sure he's up for the job. And that is job one for Biden tonight, is convincing people that he has the energy to get this done. That's why he was down for a full week going in.
Preparing
at Camp David. And they did the same thing before the State of the Union, where he did well.
But I do have to say that that's more typical. Like, that's a typical approach. And
Yeah.
Trump has been doing his own preparation. And even though he was sort of blowing off preparation, he has been doing preparation as well.
For sure.
So Biden's taking that traditional approach, but the fact that he was having like no other events, right? It was completely dark. He was totally holed up. Is that what you think
That's
is
unusual.
like significant?
Yeah,
Okay.
that he didn't go and there was a Pride event at the White House this week that Jill Biden appeared at, and he has been really focused on preparing because he knows that he has to project energy tonight.
Let's bring in Ashley Parker, senior national political correspondent. Ashley, I want to pick up with you right there. So, Rhonda's been talking to voters, you've been talking to voters, and one of the folks that she talked to brought up costs of goods and inflation. How are voters talking to you about the economy and their own personal feelings about the economy and what the candidates need to do to win them over?
So it's a question I'm actually very well equipped to answer because just last month I was in Hudson, Wisconsin, which is a small town in western Wisconsin that's full of sort of double haters or double dislikers, these voters who don't really like either option and are trying to figure out what to do. And a number of voters, when it came to policy issues, they had policy concerns about President Biden and sort of personality and behavior concerns about former President Trump. But the two things they mentioned were the Israel-Gaza war and the economy. And a number of them would say, I don't really like how former President Trump behaves, what he tweets, but I liked the economy better under him. And again, when they're saying this, there's actually a lot of indicators, economic indicators, under President Biden where the economy is going quite well. But to your question of in their daily lives, that's what they were referring to. They were talking about how they feel when they go to buy gas and go to buy groceries. And one man immediately pops to mind. His name was Jim, and I sort of accosted him in a country market there while he was shopping. He was looking for a pickling spice because he was going to pickle some northern trout. And he said, look, I don't like either candidate, but I think I'm probably going to vote for Trump because when I go to the checkout and I pay for this, I'm going to get pissed off all over again about how expensive groceries are.
Ashley, stick with us for a minute. We're going to jump back to Atlanta and Rhonda Colvin. Rhonda?
That's right. I'm here in the media area and spin room with Vivek Ramaswamy, who ran in the primary race for president. And you're here on behalf of former President Trump. We were just talking about what voters want out of this. And some of the voters I talked to said they want this to be about policy. And that's something that they have not heard from the former president. What type of policy do you think the former president will be bringing up tonight? Is there one specific thing that he can talk about?
I think two areas to focus on are immigration and the economy. We've had the largest illegal mass migration into this country in our lifetime, but what does that mean for the country? What does that mean for crime that we're seeing in cities across this country? I think it's a good topic for both candidates to actually opine on and for the moderators to focus on. And the second is economic growth itself. Prices have gone up, wages haven't, not at the same pace. And Americans feel that in their pocketbook no matter what they're told by the political class or the media. So I think those would be two great areas. And I do agree with that voter you talked to. If this is a debate about historical policy records and policy vision for the future of the country, this is going to be a service to America, this debate will tonight. If this is about past accusations, labels to confer on one candidate or the other, convicted felon this or whatever, I think it's going to be a disservice to the country. And so the question is, in some ways people ask which Biden's showing up or which Trump is showing up. I'm interested in which CNN shows up. And if CNN, as the moderators, focuses this on policy, I think it's going to be good for America.
You know, we have to say that a week from today, he is going back to New York to face a sentencing hearing. Should he also address the conviction and some of the other charges that he's facing?
Look, I think that I have my views. I've been clear about them. It's no secret. I think this conviction in Manhattan is a betrayal of the rule of law itself. And I'm not alone in saying that. Legal scholars, including even some on the center left, have said the same thing. The scenario I worry about, though, is this one, right? Think back to 2020. The Hunter Biden laptop story was suppressed on the eve of the election, and many voters who were surveyed afterwards, independent voters, said they might have changed their vote had they had access to that information. That destroyed the legitimacy of the election in the eyes of so many Americans. I worry about that risk on steroids this time around. In 2024, I want to imagine a scenario. I don't think it's implausible. Let's say Biden narrowly wins an election after calling Trump and labeling him in the media, labeling him a convicted felon. And then the Supreme Court later overturns that conviction, as many legal scholars expect. I worry about what that means for this country, because we are skating on thin ice right now, and we can't take that type of blow of public trust to our confidence.
And one quick question for you, lastly. Can the former president be measured? We don't often see him measured. We see him combative. Can he come in and be measured tonight?
I think Donald Trump has all the octaves on the keyboard available to him. But my best advice to him, and I shared this with him, is you be you. You do what you feel your heart tells you to do, not what anybody else gave you as a pre-specified talking point. But one thing that I do know is in his heart, and doesn't always come across, certainly in a lot of the interviews and otherwise, is he is a president who actually in his heart cares about uniting the country. I don't think that always comes across, but if we see a glimmer of that come across tonight, that's the true Donald Trump that I think the story that doesn't get told. I'm hopeful that it does. It'll be good for the country and also good for showing a lot of independents who are uncertain of how to vote, who they're going to vote for. Another thing I would say is for people who are watching at home, yes, there's immigration, the economy, and everything else. But ask yourself, which of those two leaders is proud of being an American, is proud of being a citizen of this country, is proud and stands for American exceptionalism without apologizing for it? That's something that especially a lot of young people are hungry for right now, is hungry to be part of something bigger than ourselves, hungry to be part of a country greater than the sum of its parts. And I think Donald Trump's embrace of American exceptionalism is something that's an intangible that I hope comes across tonight in a way that brings especially the next generation that's hungry for that along with him.
All right, Vivek Ramaswamy, thank you for stopping by.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
It's good seeing you.
All right, good to see you. We'll send things back to you in the studio.
Great, thank you, Rhonda. I'm going to bring Ashley Parker back. Ashley, thanks for sticking with us. So that's one of the folks who could be vice presidential nominee. Trump has sort of teased this. He's want to do that. He, of course, used to be the host and producer of The Apprentice. But he has talked about all of these potential vice presidential candidates. He had said that one of them will be here tonight. Ramaswamy is certainly one of the people who could be considered. How much are these former rivals of his or longtime supporters of his auditioning for that job still?
Oh, they will be auditioning for that job up until the moment when former President Trump announces his pick. And that's because he wants it that way. He loves to see people perform for him. He sort of understands the showmanship of it keeping the audience on the edge of their seats, waiting with bated breath. But he's also someone who, when he took the presidency, he originally thought it would be a bit more like a monarchy and was frustrated to find out that, you have to get Congress on board. You just can't decree things like a king. So any chance he has to make people sort of dance and jump in front of him and kiss his ring is something not just from that showmanship end he likes, but also he just finds quite gratifying personally.
I want to hear from you, Ashley, why you think both candidates agreed to this debate tonight, because it's still 4 months out between now and the election. We've totally scuttled the plan to go with the bipartisan debate commission that usually structures the debates. Why tonight?
Well, you know, you have to keep in mind that this is something that President Biden and his team proposed and sort of laid out some terms that Trump and his team agreed to. For Biden, their challenge is that, as he has said repeatedly, you know, for him to win, don't compare me to the almighty, compare me to the alternative. And the challenge with that is that there's a heavy dose of sort of Trump amnesia, where a huge swath of the country has forgotten what they disliked about him and why they voted him out and chose Biden over him 4 years ago. And so the Biden team calculated that they need the country to start paying attention to the alternative. And they thought a debate would be the best way to sort of focus the attention on all the things that voters tell me and their friends and everyone else that they don't like about former President Trump. Sort of the boorishness, the crassness, the tweets, the personality, the chaos that always seems to surround him. And Trump said yes. In part, he can't really turn down a challenge. But also, he has something to gain, too. He wants to remind voters, in part of his message, which is that he thinks he can show that Biden is too old, too enfeebled, and that his team has also told me that when they talk to voters, voters like some of his policies, but they don't like him personally. So again, Ramaswamy was saying, you know, Trump can hit all the octaves, and it kind of depends on which Trump shows up. But they're hoping that he can close that gap and focus more on the policies that the country did seem to like, and less on being sort of himself.
You know, finally, Ashley, we're going to talk a little bit more shortly about exactly what's going to happen tonight in terms of the parameters and the rules. But one thing we do know is that the mics will be turned off when people are not speaking. And we've been talking here in the studio about who that really benefits, because in one way it could benefit, I think the conventional wisdom is Biden, because it stops that Trump interrupting, that aggression, that, you know, won't you just shut up, man, sort of thing that Biden had to do a few years ago. But James was bringing up the point that it could actually help Trump, because it does cool the temperature. It sort of forces him to calm down and keep it together. What do you think?
I mean, that is kind of one of the questions. Not only that it potentially forces Trump to not behave in the way that voters, frankly, don't like, but then there's some unknowns. What happens if a candidate's mic is cut so the audience can't hear what they're saying, but certainly the other candidate standing up on stage next to them can hear, right? So I can envision a scenario where Trump is continuing to barrel ahead, his microphone is off, and Biden is paused because he hears Trump right next to him, but to the audience at home, does it look like he is frozen? Does it unfairly play into, that narrative that he's too old? So I think there's just a lot of things we don't quite know how it will play out.
Ashley Parker, thank you so much. I know you will be watching right alongside us tonight. Appreciate you talking with us. JM, how much has changed in 4 years? I mean, because, you know, James brought up the point that the last time these two men debated was 4 years ago against each other. And usually by now, the challenger is more seasoned in debates because they've been going through the primary process, not this time because Trump sat out. So how much has changed in 4 years?
A lot has changed, as James was referencing earlier, just in terms of the rust factor. I think that's correct, which is they're both actually coming in with rust here. But also the polling is different. You know, Trump is leading Biden in some national polls. He never led Biden in a Washington Post national poll in 2020. So this is a very different race than in 2020.
And when we reflect on the 2020 debates that these candidates did, what stands out to you in terms of lessons learned?
Yeah, I think Trump learned his lesson, and he said he learned his lesson from that first debate against Biden. But by the time they got to the third debate, they had to skip the second debate. By the time they got to the third debate, it was almost kind of too late in a sense. And we know from polling that at most, this is going to shift a point or a couple of points one way or the other kind of post-debate. And even that's a little dubious in terms of how much we can attribute specifically to the debate, because the debates don't happen in a vacuum, right? There's a lot of other things going on. Both of these candidates have campaign events scheduled tomorrow, right after this debate. But having said that, yes, I think they are familiar with the other one. They have both kind of been there, done that. They've done this rodeo before, and they kind of want a piece of each other.
Not only Biden presidency has been in the middle of these 4 years, but January 6th has been in between that transition, right? From after the time that they debated, Trump lost, and then Biden was sworn in as president. January 6th was in many ways really a cataclysmic moment on the verge of the Biden presidency. And Joe Biden references that often when he talks about democracy and he talks about the stability of our nation. And it left an impression on him, not just in terms of sort of the politics and Trump's, what a Trump presidency would be like, but it really impacted how he sees that man.
Yeah, and he said publicly that it's one of the reasons he felt like he had to run for a second term. What's interesting is I went back and rewatched the 2020 debates. What we haven't talked about is Trump actually had COVID during that first debate, and that was one of the reasons he didn't do well. But the moderator, Chris Wallace, asked, will you accept the results of the election? Trump was non-committal. Biden actually said, if Trump loses, he's going to accept the results. That's the way. Once all the votes are counted, he'll accept it, and I'll accept it. And it is sort of striking to watch, just because you know what happens on January 6th, and you know that even now Trump won't acknowledge that he legitimately lost.
I mean, that's
the
probably a question
election.
that's going to come up from the moderators
I assume
tonight.
it'll come up early,
Yep.
and I assume Trump's aides pressed him so hard, like, pivot, make this about the economy and immigration, like we heard from Vivek Ramaswamy. And Biden is going to try to push Trump, and Trump's ego's on the line because Trump doesn't want to admit that he lost the election, and it says so much about his personality that he can't do that. And I do think that gives a lot of voters pause who maybe don't particularly think Joe Biden's doing a great job, but when you see Donald Trump say he's going to pardon the political prisoners from January 6th, you're sort of like, geez, is this the guy we want to give the keys to the government to again?
Rhonda, let's talk about what to expect tonight. 90 minutes of debate. Two moderators, Dana Bash and Jake Tapper, two candidates on stage, 8 feet apart. What else do we need to know about what will go down tonight?
I think one of the interesting things that a lot of people at home may not have been following is just how restrictive this is going to be for these two candidates. These are two men who travel with entourages. They have aides around them. They have supporters around them. They will only be with each other and the moderators. They will only have a bottle of water, a pen, and a notepad at their podiums. Their staff cannot come up to them during the two expected breaks to say anything or interact with them. So they're kind of alone on all of this. They can't bring anything in, any pre-made speeches or any notes to follow. This is just going to be them and the moderators. So again, that sort of heightens the anticipation for what this night is going to be. I think another thing that people are really listening out for is how much this is like past debates for both of these men. You mentioned the one that happened in Cleveland the last time that they were together. One of the things I'm watching for is, does this get personal at all? There was a moment in that Cleveland debate, if you remember, where President Biden talked about his son Beau Biden's death and how he had served in the military, and former President Trump began talking about Hunter Biden, and you could tell it got under the president's skin. So are there going to be moments like that? But overall, this is going to be truly interesting. The other thing, too, especially when it comes to Trump, we mostly see him with his base, with supporters. He loves those large rallies with thousands and hundreds of people in front of him, giving him that energy. He's not going to have any of that. And of course, we also know this is a network that he hasn't often been very friendly with. So it's going to be very interesting to see how all of these dynamics play for both of these candidates. Of course, Joe Biden is very skilled at debating. He's been debating since he started in politics when he was in his late 20s. So that's been decades. So is he going to be able to bring that experience through as well? So many questions remain. We'll probably have a lot to talk about once this is over.
And indeed, we will be talking to you when it is over. Rhonda, a reminder to our viewers and readers that our team will be back as the debate concludes. We'll have analysis and we'll dig into the highlights, the lowlights, and also do some fact-checking as well. Other details about tonight, no opening statement. They'll jump right in, but they will have a chance to do a 2-minute closing statement. And Trump will go last. They had a coin toss. Biden won, but instead of choosing to go last, he chose the side of the screen, the side of the stage. Interesting. As
It
to
is.
why. We've all been
His better
speculating
side.
on, or Trump's worst side,
Right.
or, so he chose the right side of the screen, so you'll see them laid out that way. Things are getting quiet there in Atlanta as everyone gets ready for the debate, which will start at 9 o'clock. JM, how much do debates typically impact voters and elections, and how could tonight be unique?
Well, we've talked throughout the broadcast this evening about how there's kind of moments that happen, how these are very important for momentum. Sometimes if there's a really bad moment, it can really dramatically reshape the race. But in terms of kind of polling and support, it's usually only moving the needle one way or the other ever so slightly, and that may be even less so this year because voters' views are already so baked in. We know that there's only a small sliver of voters who are those quote-unquote undecided or persuadable voters, and that's who President Biden, former President Trump are trying to address tonight. I do think what could be a wild card tonight, though, Libby, is we've heard Trump surrogates talk about how they want policy, how they want to talk about policy. One thing that could be conducive to that is the no audience that they are in this studio. It reminds me a little bit of the Bernie Sanders-Joe Biden 2020 primary debate during the early days of COVID, which was in a CNN studio, no audience, and that was very focused on policy. Obviously, those are two different, Bernie Sanders is not Donald Trump, but it could give us a little bit of a window into what we might see tonight.
Vivek Ramaswamy was very measured, very thoughtful, but as you pointed out, JM, this has been a real tone shift from Republicans because they have been blasting on Fox News, on right-wing media, and to people like us about how just how terrible Biden is, how he's on performance-enhancing drugs, of which there is zero evidence. This is a totally concocted thing from Trump's brain. But now they're changing their tune a little bit. A fascinating observation.
It is a really fascinating observation. And if, during the presidency, it was always teleprompter Trump versus Twitter Trump. And it's the same thing with the debate. He even sort of joked about it during a rally over the weekend in Philadelphia, where he said, which Trump should show up to the debate? Should it be the smash mouth one or should it be the measured one?
This is Trump saying to his supporters, which one should show up, sort of crowdsourcing it literally. Right?
And someone in the crowd yells 50-50, and then Trump laughed at that. So I think Trump likes that suspense. To JM's point, what I'll say is, in an election this close, if the debates make even a small difference, they could make all the difference. And so I think if Biden has a really bad night, you're going to have Democrats saying, does he have to be the nominee? I think if Trump has a really bad night, going into their convention in Milwaukee, you're going to have sort of the Nikki Haley wing of the party be bedwetting. And so I think it can have a really foundational impact on this race. What's interesting is Biden actually is trying to play on some of these concerns. He just tweeted a few minutes ago a picture of himself drinking a bottle of water. I think we have the picture, but basically he's saying this is my performance enhancing drug, and it's just water. He did something very similar in 2020, right before the debate. He posted a picture of himself with Jenny's ice cream and said, this is my performance enhancing drug.
And the point of this is that Trump had accused him of being jacked up during his State of the Union because he was, functioning, right? Exactly. He was like functioning because Trump had lowered the bar.
And that's,
so
Biden benefits from low expectations, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if Trump lowers the expectations so much and Biden just is kind of there, then he can just walk over a very low bar.
All right. Well, thank you so much to James Hohmann, J.M. Ringer, Rhonda Colvin, and our whole Washington Post team. We're handing it over in a moment to CNN, where the presidential debate will get underway at 9 o'clock. They're live in Atlanta. We will hear from President Joe Biden and, of course, former President Donald Trump as they face off in this really remarkable debate. It's early in the election season, 4 months away, but they agreed to do this debate as well as one in September hosted by ABC News. What's so unique about this is it is the first time ever a president and a former president are matching up. We go to CNN Live.
We're live from Georgia, a key battleground state in the race for the White House. In just moments, the current U.S. president will debate the former U.S. president as their party's presumptive nominees, a first in American history. We want to welcome our viewers in the United States and around the world to our studios in Atlanta. This is the CNN Presidential Debate.
This debate is being produced by CNN and is coming to you live on CNN, CNN International, CNN.com, CNN Max, and CNN Espanol. This is a pivotal moment between President Joe Biden and former President Donald Trump in their rematch for the nation's highest office. Each will make his case to the American people with just over 4 months until Election Day. Good evening, I'm Dana Bash, anchor of CNN's Inside Politics and co-anchor of State of the Union.
I'm Jake Tapper, anchor of CNN's The Lead and co-anchor of State of the Union. Dana and I will co-moderate this evening. Our job is to facilitate a debate between the two candidates tonight. Before we introduce them, we want to share the rules of the debate with the audience at home. Former President Trump will be on the left side of the screen. President Biden will be appearing on the right. A coin toss determined their positions. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to answer a question and 1 minute each for responses and rebuttals. An additional minute for follow-up, clarification, or response is at the moderator's discretion.
When it's time for a candidate to speak, his microphone will be turned on and his opponent's microphone will be turned off. Should a candidate interrupt when his microphone is muted, he will be difficult to understand for viewers at home. At the end of the debate, each candidate will get 2 minutes for closing statements. There is no studio audience tonight. Pre-written notes, props, or contact with campaign staff are not permitted during the debate. By accepting our invitation to debate, both candidates and their campaigns agreed to accept these rules.
Now, please welcome the 46th President of the United States, Joe Biden.
Folks, how are you? Great to be here. Thank you.
And please welcome the 45th President of the United States, Donald Trump. Gentlemen, thanks so much for being here. Let's begin the debate, and let's start with the issue that voters consistently say is their top concern, the economy. President Biden, inflation has slowed, but prices remain high. Since you took office, the price of essentials has increased. For example, a basket of groceries that cost $100 then now costs more than $120. And typical home prices have jumped more than 30%. What do you say to voters who feel they are worse off under your presidency than they were under President Trump?
We got to take a look at what I was left when I became president and what Mr. Trump left me. We had an economy that was in free fall. The pandemic was so badly handled. Many people were dying. All he said was, it's not that serious. Just inject a little bleach into your arm. You'll be all right. The economy collapsed. There were no jobs. Unemployment rate rose to 15%. It was terrible. And so what we had to do was try to put things back together again. And that's exactly what we began to do. We created 15,000 new jobs. We brought out in the position where we have 800,000 new manufacturing jobs. But there's more to be done. There's more to be done. Working class people are still in trouble. I come from Scranton, Pennsylvania. I come of a household where the kitchen table, if the things weren't able to be met during the month, it was a problem. Price of eggs, the price of gas, the price of housing, the price of a whole range of things. That's why I'm working so hard to make sure I deal with those problems. And we're going to make sure that we reduce the price of housing. We're going to make sure we build 2 million new units. We're going to make sure we cap rents so corporate greed can't take over. The combination, what I was left with in corporate greed, is the reason why we're in this problem right now. In addition to that, we're in a situation where if you take a look at all that was done in his administration, he didn't do much at all. By the time he left, things were in chaos, literally chaos. And so we put things back together. We created, I said, those jobs. We make sure we had a situation where we brought down the price of prescription drugs, which is a major issue for many people, to $15 for an insulin shot as opposed to $400. No senior has to pay more than $200 for any drug, all the drugs they can include beginning next year. And the situation is we're going to make that available to everybody, to all Americans. So we're working to bring down the price around the kitchen table, and that's what we're going to get done.
Thank you. President Trump?
We have the greatest economy in the history of our country. We have never done so well. Everybody was amazed by it. Other countries were copying us. We got hit with COVID, and when we did, we spent the money necessary so we wouldn't end up in a Great Depression, the likes of which we had in 1929. By the time we finished, so we did a great job. We got a lot of credit for the economy, a lot of credit for the military, and no wars, and so many other things. Everything was rocking good. But the thing we never got the credit for, and we should have, is getting us out of that COVID mess. He created mandates that was a disaster for our country. But other than that, we had given them back a country where the stock market actually was higher than pre-COVID, and nobody thought that was even possible. The only jobs he created are for illegal immigrants and bounce-back jobs, a bounce back from the COVID. He has not done a good job. He's done a poor job, and inflation's killing our country. It is absolutely killing us.
Thank you. President Biden?
Well, look, the greatest economy in the world, he's the only one who thinks that, I think. I don't know anybody else who thinks he had the greatest economy in the world. And, you know, the fact of the matter is that we find ourselves in a situation where his economy, he rewarded the wealthy. He had the largest tax cut in American history, $2 trillion. He raised a deficit larger than any president has in any one term. He's the only president other than Herbert Hoover who's lost more jobs than he had when he began, since Herbert Hoover. The idea that he did something that was significant, and the military, you know, when he was president, they were still killing people in Afghanistan. He didn't do anything about that. When he was president, we were still finding ourselves in a position where you had a notion that we were this safe country. The truth is, I'm the only president this century that doesn't have this decade, that doesn't have any troops dying anywhere in the world like he did.
President Trump, I want to follow up if I can.
Am I allowed to respond to him?
Well, I'm going to ask you a follow-up. You can do whatever you want with the minute that we give you. I want to follow up. You want to impose a 10% tariff on all goods coming into the U.S. How will you ensure that that doesn't drive prices even higher?
It's not going to drive them higher. It's just going to cost countries that have been ripping us off for years, like China and many others, in all fairness to China. It's going to just force them to pay us a lot of money, reduce our deficit tremendously, and give us a lot of power for other things. But he made a statement. The only thing he was right about is I gave you the largest tax cut in history. I also gave you the largest regulation cut in history. That's why we had all the jobs. And the jobs went down, and then they bounced back, and he's taking credit for bounce-back jobs. You can't do that. He also said he inherited 9% inflation. No, he inherited almost no inflation, and it stayed that way for 14 months. And then it blew up under his leadership because they spent money like a bunch of people that didn't know what they were doing, and they don't know what they were doing. It was the worst, probably the worst administration in history. There's never been. And as far as Afghanistan is concerned, I was getting out of Afghanistan, but we were getting out with dignity, with strength, with power. He got out. It was the most embarrassing day in the history of our country's life.
President Trump, over the last 8 years, under both of your administrations, the national debt soared to record highs. And according to a new nonpartisan analysis, President Trump, your administration approved $8.4 trillion in new debt, while so far, President Biden, you've approved $4.3 trillion in new debt. So, former President Trump, many of the tax cuts that you signed into law are set to expire next year. You want to extend them and go even further, you say. With the U.S. facing trillion-dollar deficits and record debt, why should top earners and corporations pay even less in taxes than they do now?
Because the tax cuts spurred the greatest economy that we've ever seen just prior to COVID. And even after COVID, it was so strong that we were able to get through COVID much better than just about any other country. But we spurred, that tax spurred. Now, when we cut the taxes, as an example, the corporate tax was cut down to 21% from 39%, plus beyond that. We took in more revenue with much less tax, and companies were bringing back trillions of dollars back into our country. The country was going like never before, and we were ready to start paying down debt. We were ready to start using the liquid gold right under our feet, the oil and gas right under our feet. We were going to have something that nobody else has had We got hit with COVID. We did a lot to fix it. I gave him an unbelievable situation with all of the therapeutics and all of the things that we came up with. We gave him something great. Remember, more people died under his administration, even though we had largely fixed it. More people died under his administration than our administration, and we were right in the middle of it, something which a lot of people don't like to talk about. But he had far more people dying in his administration. He did the mandate, which is a disaster, mandating it. The vaccine went out. He did a mandate on the vaccine, which is the thing that people most objected to about the vaccine. And he did a very poor job, just a very poor job. And I will tell you, not only poor there, but throughout the entire world, we're no longer respected as a country. They don't respect our leadership. They don't respect the United States anymore. We're like a third world nation between weaponization of his election, trying to go after his political opponent, all of the things he's done. We've become like a third world nation, and it's a shame. The damage he's done to our country, and I'd love to ask him, and will, why he allowed millions of people to come in here from prisons, jails, and mental institutions to come into our country and destroy our country.
President Trump, we will get to immigration later in this block. President Biden, I want to give you an opportunity to respond to this question about the national debt.
He had the largest national debt of any president in a four-year period, number one. Number two, that $2 trillion tax cut benefited the very wealthy. What I'm going to do is fix the tax system. For example, we have 1,000 trillionaires in America. I mean, billionaires in America. And what's happening? They're in a situation where they, in fact, pay 8.2% in taxes. If they just paid 24%, 25%, either one of those numbers, they'd raise $500 billion, I should say, in a 10-year period. We'd be able to wipe out his debt. We'd be able to help make sure that all those things we need to do, child care, elder care, making sure that we continue to strengthen our health care system, making sure that we're able to make every single solitary person eligible for what I've been able to do with the with the COVID, with dealing with everything we have to do with, look, if we finally beat Medicare.
Thank you, President Biden. President Trump?
Well, he's right. He did beat Medicare. He beat it to death, and he's destroying Medicare because all of these people are coming in. They're putting them on Medicare. They're putting them on Social Security. They're going to destroy Social Security. This man is going to single-handedly destroy Social Security. These millions and millions of people coming in, they're trying to put them on Social Security. He will wipe out Social Security. He will wipe out Medicare. So he was right in the way he finished that sentence. And it's a shame. What's happened to our country in the last 4 years is not to be believed. Foreign countries, I'm friends with a lot of people, they cannot believe what happened to the United States of America. We're no longer respected. They don't like us. We give them everything they want, and they think we're stupid. They think we're very stupid people. What we're doing for other countries, and they do nothing for us. What this man has done is absolutely criminal.
Thank you, President Trump. Dana?
This is the first presidential election since the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. This morning, the court ruled on yet another abortion case, temporarily allowing emergency abortions to continue in Idaho, despite that state's restrictive ban. Former President Trump, you take credit for the decision to overturn Roe v. Wade, which returned the issue of abortion to the states.
Correct.
However, the federal government still plays a role in whether or not women have access to abortion pills. They're used in about 2/3 of all abortions. As president, would you block abortion medication?
First of all, the Supreme Court just approved the abortion pill, and I agree with their decision to have done that, and I will not block it. And if you look at this whole question that you're asking, complex but not really complex. 51 years ago, you had Roe v. Wade, and everybody wanted to get it back to the states. Everybody, without exception. Democrats, Republicans, liberals, conservatives. Everybody wanted it back. Religious leaders. And what I did is I put 3 great Supreme Court justices on the court, and they happened to vote in favor of killing Roe v. Wade and moving it back to the states. This is something that everybody wanted. Now, 10 years ago or so, they started talking about how many weeks and how many this, getting into other things. But every legal scholar throughout the world, the most respected, wanted it brought back to the states. I did that. Now the states are working it out. If you look at Ohio, it was a decision that was an end result that was a little bit more liberal than you would have thought. Kansas, I would say the same thing. Texas is different. Florida is different. But they're all making their own decisions right now. And right now, the states control it. That's the vote of the people. Like Ronald Reagan, I believe in the exceptions. I am a person that believes. And frankly, I think it's important to believe in the exceptions. Some people, you have to follow your heart. Some people don't believe in that. But I believe in the exceptions for rape, incest, and the life of the mother. I think it's very important. Some people don't. Follow your heart. But you have to get elected also. And because that has to do with other things. You got to get elected. The problem they have is they're radical because they will take the life of a child in the 8th month, the 9th month, and even after birth. After birth, if you look at the former governor of Virginia, he was willing to do this. He said, we'll put the baby aside and we'll determine what we do with the baby, meaning we'll kill the baby. What happened is we brought it back to the states, and the country is now coming together on this issue. It's been a great thing.
Thank you. President Biden?
It's been a terrible thing, what you've done. The fact is that the vast majority of constitutional scholars supported Roe when it was decided, supported Roe. And that's this idea that they're all against it is just ridiculous. And this is the guy who says the state should be able to have it. We're in a state where in 6 weeks, you don't even know whether you're pregnant or not, but you cannot see a doctor and have him decide on what your circumstances are, whether you need help. The idea that states are able to do this is a little like saying we're going to turn civil rights back to the states, let each state have a different rule. Look, there's so many young women who have been, including a young woman who just was murdered, and he went to the funeral. The idea that she was murdered by an immigrant coming in, they talk about that. But here's the deal. There's a lot of young women who are being raped by their in-laws, by their spouses, brothers and sisters, it's just ridiculous, and they can do nothing about it. And they try to arrest them when they cross state lines.
Thank you.
There have been many young women murdered by the same people he allows to come across our border. We have a border that's the most dangerous place anywhere in the world, considered the most dangerous place anywhere in the world. And he opened it up, and these killers are coming into our country, and they are raping and killing women. And it's a terrible thing. As far as the abortion is concerned, it is now back with the states. The states are voting. In many cases, it's frankly a very liberal decision. In many cases, it's the opposite. But they're voting, and it's bringing it back to the vote of the people, which is what everybody wanted, including the founders, if they knew about this issue, which, frankly, they didn't. But they would have, everybody wanted brought back. Ronald Reagan wanted it brought back. He wasn't able to get it. Everybody wanted it brought back, and many presidents had tried to get it back. I was the one to do it. And again, this gives it the vote of the people, and that's where they wanted it. Every legal scholar wanted it that way.
Staying on the topic of abortion, President Biden, 7 states, I'll let you do that. This is the same topic. 7 states have no legal restrictions on how far into a pregnancy a woman can obtain an abortion. Do you support any legal limits on how late a woman should be able to terminate a pregnancy?
I supported Roe v. Wade, which had 3 trimesters. The first time is between the woman and the doctor. Second time is between the doctor and an extreme situation. The third time is between the doctor, between the woman and the state. The idea that the politicians, that the founders wanted the politicians to be the ones making decisions about women's health is ridiculous. That's the last. No politician should be making that decision. A doctor should be making those decisions. That's how it should be run. That's what you're going to do. And if I'm elected, I'm going to restore Roe v. Wade.
So that means he can take the life of the baby in the 9th month and even after birth, because some states, Democrat run, take it after birth. Again, the former governor of Virginia, put the baby down, then we decide what to do with it. So he's willing to, as we say, rip the baby out of the womb in the 9th month and kill the baby. Nobody wants that to happen, Democrat or Republican. Nobody wants it to happen.
You're lying. That is simply not true. The Roe v. Wade does not provide for that. That's not the circumstance. Only if a woman's life is in danger, she's going to die. That's the only circumstance in which that can happen. But we are not for late-term abortion, period. Period, period.
Under Roe v. Wade, you have late-term abortion. You can do whatever you want, depending on the state. You can do whatever you want. We don't think that's a good thing. We think it's a radical thing. We think the Democrats are the radicals, not the Republicans.
For 51 years, that was the law. 51 years, constitutional scholarship said it was the right way to go. 51 years, and it was taken away because this guy put very conservative members on the Supreme Court. He takes credit for taking it away. What's he going to do? What's he going to do, in fact, if the MAGA Republicans, he gets elected, and the MAGA Republicans control the Congress, and they pass a universal ban on abortion, period, across the board at 6 weeks or 7 or 8 or 10 weeks, something very, very conservative. Is he going to sign that bill? I'll veto it. He'll sign it.
Thank you.
Let's turn now to the issue of immigration and border security. President Biden, a record number of migrants have illegally crossed the southern border on your watch. Overwhelming border states and overburdening cities such as New York and Chicago, and in some cases causing real safety and security concerns. Given that, why should voters trust you to solve this crisis?
Because we worked very hard to get a bipartisan agreement that not only changed all of that, it made sure that we are in a situation where you had no circumstance where they could come across the border with the number of border police there are now. We significantly increased the number of asylum officers. By the way, the Border Patrol endorsed my position. In addition to that, we found ourselves in a situation where when he was president, he was separating babies from their mothers, putting them in cages, making sure the families were separated. That's not the right way to go. What I've done since I've changed the law, what's happened? I've changed it in a way that now you're in a situation where there are 40% fewer people coming across the border illegally. That's better than when he left office. And I'm going to continue to move until we get the total ban on the total initiative relative to what we can do with more Border Patrol and more asylum officers.
President Trump?
I really don't know what he said at the end of that sentence. I don't think he knows what he said either. Look, we had the safest border in the history of our country. The border, all he had to do was leave it. All he had to do was leave it. He decided to open up our border, open up our country to people that are from prisons, people that are from mental institutions, insane asylum, terrorists. We have the largest number of terrorists coming into our country right now, all terrorists, all over the world, not just in South America, all over the world. They come from the Middle East, everywhere. All over the world, they're pouring in. And this guy just left it open. And he didn't need legislation because I didn't have legislation. I said, close the border. We had the safest border in history. In that final couple of months of my presidency, we had, according to Border Patrol, who is great, and by the way, who endorsed me for president, but I won't say that, but they endorsed me for president. Brandon, just speak to him. But look, we had the safest border in history. Now we have the worst border in history. There's never been anything like it. And people are dying all over the place, including the people that are coming up in caravans.
Thank you, President Trump. President Biden?
The only terrorist who's done anything crossing the border is one who came along and killed three, under his administration, killed an al-Qaeda person come in his administration, killed 3 American soldiers, killed 3 American soldiers. That's the only terrorist that's there. I'm not saying that no terrorist ever got through, but the idea they're emptying their prisons, we're welcoming these people, that's simply not true. There's no data to support what he said. Once again, he's exaggerating, he's lying.
President Trump, staying on the topic of immigration, you've said that you're going to carry out, quote, the largest domestic deportation operation in American history, unquote. Does that mean that you will deport every undocumented immigrant in America, including those who have jobs, including those whose spouses are citizens, and including those who have lived here for decades? And if so, how will you do it?
Just 1 second. He said we killed 3 people. The people we killed are al-Baghdadi and Soleimani, the 2 greatest terrorists, biggest terrorists anywhere in the world, and it had a huge impact on everything, not just border, on everything. He's the one that killed people with the bad water, including hundreds of thousands of people dying, and also killing our citizens when they come in. We are living right now in a rat's nest. They're killing our people in New York, in California, in every state in the union, because we don't have borders anymore. Every state is now a border. And because of his ridiculous, insane, and very stupid policies, people are coming in and they're killing our citizens at a level that we've never seen. We call it migrant crime. I call it Biden migrant crime. They're killing our citizens at a level that we've never seen before. And you're reading it like these 3 incredible young girls over the last few days. One of them, I just spoke to the mother, and they just had the funeral for this girl, 12 years old. This is horrible what's taken place. What's taken place in our country, we're literally an uncivilized country now. He doesn't want it to be. He just doesn't know. He opened the borders. Nobody's ever seen anything like. And we have to get a lot of these people out, and we have to get them out fast because they're going to destroy our country. Just take a look at where they're living. They're living in luxury hotels in New York City and other places. Our veterans are on the street. They're dying because he doesn't care about our veterans. He doesn't care. He doesn't like the military at all, and he doesn't care about our veterans. Nobody been worse. I had the highest approval rating for veterans taking care of the VA. He has the worst. He's gotten rid of all the things that I approved, choice that I got through Congress, all of the different things I approved, they abandoned. We had by far the highest, and now it's down in less than half because he's done all these great things that we did, and I think he did it just because I approved it, which is crazy. But he has killed so many people at our border by allowing all of these people to come in. And it's a very sad day in America.
President Biden, you have the mic.
Every single thing he said is a lie. Every single one. For example, veterans are a hell of a lot better off since I passed the PACT Act. 1 million of them now have insurance, and their families have it. Their families have it because what happened, whether it was Agent Orange or burn pits, they're all being covered now. And he opposed, his group opposed that. We're also in a situation where we have great respect for veterans. My son spent a year in Iraq, living right next to one of those burn pits, came back with stage 4 glioblastoma. I was recently in France for D-Day, and I spoke all about those heroes that died. I went to the World War II cemetery, World War I cemetery he refused to go to. He was standing with his 4-star general, and he told me, he said, I don't want to go in there because they're a bunch of losers and suckers. My son was not a loser, was not a sucker. You're the sucker. You're the loser.
President Trump?
First of all, that was a made-up quote, suckers and losers. They made it up. It was in a third-rate magazine that's failing, like many of these magazines. He made that up. He put it in commercials. We've notified him. We had 19 people that said I didn't say it. And think of this. Who would say I'm at a cemetery or I'm talking about our veterans? Because nobody's taken better care. I'm so glad this came up, and he brought it up. There's nobody that's taken better care of our soldiers than I have. To think that I would, in front of generals and others, say suckers and losers. We have 19 people that said it was never said by me. It was made up by him, just like Russia was made up, just like the 51 intelligence agents are made up, just like the new thing with the 16 economists are talking. It's the same thing. 51 intelligence agents said that the laptop was Russia disinformation. It wasn't. That came from his son, Hunter. It wasn't Russia disinformation. He made up the suckers and losers, so he should apologize to me right now.
The 4-star general standing to your side who was on your staff who said you said it, period. That's number one. And number two, the idea that I have to apologize to you for anything along the line. We've done more for veterans than any president has in American history. And they now are in their family. The only sacred obligation we have as a country is to care for our veterans when they come home and their families and equip them when they go to war. That's what we're doing. That's what the VA is doing now. They're doing more for veterans than ever before in our history.
All right, thank you so much.
Let's move to the topic of foreign policy. I want to begin with Russia's war against Ukraine, which is now in its 3rd year. Former President Trump, Russian President Vladimir Putin says he'll only end this war if Russia keeps the Ukrainian territory it has already claimed and Ukraine abandons its bid to join NATO. Are Putin's terms acceptable to you?
First of all, our veterans and our soldiers can't stand this guy. They can't stand him. They think he's the worst commander-in-chief, if that's what you call him, that we've ever had. They can't stand him. So let's get that straight. And they like me more than just about any of them. And that's based on every single bit of information. As far as Russia and Ukraine, if we had a real president, the president that knew, that was respected by Putin, he would have never invaded Ukraine. A lot of people are dead right now, much more than people know. You know, they talk about numbers. You can double those numbers, maybe triple those numbers. He did nothing to stop it. In fact, I think he encouraged Russia from going in. I'll tell you what happened. He was so bad with Afghanistan. It was such a horrible embarrassment, most embarrassing moment in the history of our country, that when Putin watched that and he saw the incompetence, that he should have fired those generals, like I fired the one that you mentioned, and so he's got no love lost, but he should have fired those generals. No general got fired for the most embarrassing moment in the history of our country, Afghanistan, where we left billions of dollars of equipment behind. We lost 13 beautiful soldiers, and 38 soldiers were obliterated. And by the way, we left people behind, too. We left American citizens behind. When Putin saw that, he said, you know what? I think we're going to go in and maybe take this was his dream. I talked to him about it, his dream. The difference is he never would have invaded Ukraine, never. Just like Israel would have never been invaded in a million years by Hamas. You know why? Because Iran was broke with me. I wouldn't let anybody do business with them. They ran out of money. They were broke. They had no money for Hamas. They had no money for anything, no money for terror. That's why you had no terror at all during my administration. This place, the whole world is blowing up under him.
President Biden?
I've never heard so much malarkey in my whole life. Look, the fact of the matter is that we're in a situation where, let's take the last point first. Iran attacked American troops, caused brain damage for a number of these troops, and he did nothing about it. Recently, not when he was president. They attacked. He said they're just having headaches. That's all it is. He didn't do a thing when the attack took place, number one. Number two, we got over 100,000 Americans and others out of Afghanistan during that airlift. Number three, we found ourselves in a situation where, if you take a look at what Trump did in Ukraine, this guy told Trump, do whatever you want, do whatever you want. And that's exactly what Trump did to Putin, encourage him, do whatever you want. And he went in. And listen to what he said when he went in. He was going to take Kyiv in 5 days, remember? Because it's part of the old Soviet Union. That's what he wanted to reestablish, Kyiv. And he, in fact, didn't do it at all. He wasn't able to get it done. And they've lost thousands and thousands of troops, 500,000 troops.
President Trump,
I never said that.
For 1 minute, I just want to go back to my original question, which is, are Putin's terms acceptable to you? Keeping the territory in Ukraine?
No, they're not acceptable. But look, this is a war that never should have started. If we had a leader in this war, he led everybody along. He's given $200 billion now or more to Ukraine. He's given $200 billion. That's a lot of money. I don't think there's ever been anything like it. Every time that Zelensky comes to this country, he walks away with $60 billion. He's the greatest salesman ever. And I'm not knocking him. I'm not knocking anything. I'm only saying the money that we're spending on this war, and we shouldn't be spending, it should have never happened. I will have that war settled between Putin and Zelensky as president-elect before I take office on January 20th. I'll have that war settled. People being killed so needlessly, so stupidly, and I will get it settled, and I'll get it settled fast before I take office.
President Biden, you have a minute.
The fact is that Putin is a war criminal. He's killed thousands and thousands of people. And he has made one thing clear. He wants to reestablish what was part of the Soviet Empire, not just a piece. He wants all of Ukraine. That's what he wants. And then you think he'll stop there? Do you think he'll stop when if he takes Ukraine? What do you think happens to Poland? What do you think of Belarus? What do you think happens to those NATO countries? And so if you want a war, you ought to find out what he's going to do, because if in fact he does what he says and walks away, and by the way, all that money we give Ukraine are from weapons we make here in the United States. We give them the weapons, not the money at this point. And our NATO allies have produced as much funding for Ukraine as we have. That's why we're strong.
Thank you. Moving on to the Middle East. In October, Hamas attacked Israel, killing more than 1,000 people and taking hundreds of hostages. Among those held and thought to still be alive are 5 Americans. Israel's response has killed thousands of Palestinians and created a humanitarian crisis in Gaza. President Biden, you've put forward a proposal to resolve this conflict, but so far Hamas has not released the remaining hostages, and Israel is continuing its military offensive in Gaza. So what additional leverage will you use to get Hamas and Israel to end the war? You have 2 minutes.
Number one, everyone from the United Nations Security Council straight through to the G7 to the Israelis and Netanyahu himself have endorsed the plan I put forward. Which has 3 stages to it. The first stage is trade the hostages for a ceasefire. Second phase is a ceasefire with additional conditions. The third phase is the end of the war. The only one who wants the war to continue is Hamas, number one. They're the only ones standing out. We're still pushing hard to get them to accept. In the meantime, what's happened? In Israel, we're finding that the only thing I've denied Israel was 2,000-pound bombs. They don't work very well in populated areas. They kill a lot of innocent people. We're providing Israel with all the weapons they need and when they need them. And by the way, I'm the guy that organized the world against Iran when they had a full-blown intercontinental ballistic missile attack on Israel. No one was hurt. One Israeli was accidentally killed, and it just stopped. We saved Israel. We are the biggest producer of support for Israel of anyone in the world. And so there are 2 different things. Hamas cannot be allowed to be continued. We continue to send our experts and our intelligence people as to how they can get Hamas like we did bin Laden. You don't have to do it. And by the way, they've been greatly weakened, Hamas, greatly weakened, and they should be. They should be eliminated. But you've got to be careful for using certain weapons among population centers.
Just going back to Ukraine for 1 second. We have an ocean separating us. The European nations together have spent $100 billion, or maybe more than that, less than us. Why doesn't he call them and say, you got to put up your money like I did with NATO? I got them to put up hundreds of billions of dollars. The Secretary General of NATO said Trump did the most incredible job I've ever seen. They wouldn't have any. They were going out of business. We were spending almost 100% of the money was paid by us. He didn't do that. He's getting all. You got to ask these people to put up the money. We're over $100 billion more spent, and it has a bigger impact on them because of location, because we have an ocean in between. You got to ask them. As far as Israel and Hamas, Israel's the one that wants to go. He said the only one who wants to keep going is Hamas. Actually, Israel is the one, and you should let him go and let him finish the job. He doesn't want to do it. He's become like a Palestinian, but they don't like him because he's a very bad Palestinian. He's a weak one.
President Biden, you have a minute.
I've never heard so much foolishness. This is a guy who wants to get out of NATO. You're going to stay in NATO? He's going to pull out of NATO. The idea that we have, our strength lies in our alliances as well. It may be a big ocean, but are we ever able to avoid a war in Europe, a major war in Europe? What happens if, in fact, you have Putin continue to go into NATO? We have an Article 5 agreement. Attack on one is attack on all. You want to start the nuclear war he keeps talking about, go ahead. Let Putin go in and control Ukraine and then move on to Poland and other places. You see what happens then. He has no idea what the hell he's talking about. And by the way, I got 50 other nations around the world to support Ukraine, including Japan and South Korea, because they understand that this kind of dislocation has a serious threat to the whole world peace. No major war in Europe has ever been able to be contained just to Europe.
President Trump, just to follow up, would you support the creation of an independent Palestinian state in order to achieve peace in the region?
I'd have to see, but before we do that, the problem we have is that we spend all the money. So they kill us on trade. I made great trade deals with the European nations because if you add them up, they're about the same size economically. Their economy is about the same size as the United States. And they were no cars, they don't want anything that we have, but we're supposed to take their cars, their food, their everything, their agriculture. I changed that. But the big thing I changed is they don't want to pay. And the only reason that he can play games with NATO is because I got them to put up hundreds of billions of dollars. I said, and he's right about this, I said, no, I'm not going to support NATO if you don't pay. They asked me that question, would you guard us against Russia at a very secret meeting of the 28 states at that time, nations at that time. And I said, no, if you don't pay, I won't do that. And you know what happened? Billions and billions of dollars came flowing in the next day and the next months. But now we're in the same position. We're paying everybody's bills.
Let's turn to the issue of democracy. Former President Trump I want to ask you about January 6, 2021. After you rallied your supporters that day, some of them stormed the Capitol to stop the constitutionally mandated counting of electoral votes. As president, you swore an oath to, quote, preserve, protect, and defend, unquote, the Constitution. What do you say to voters who believe that you violated that oath through your actions and inaction on January 6th and worry that you'll do it again?
Well, I don't think too many believe that. And let me tell you about January 6th. On January 6th, we had a great border. Nobody coming through, very few. On January 6th, we were energy independent. On January 6th, we had the lowest taxes ever. We had the lowest regulations ever. On January 6th, we were respected all over the world. All over the world, we were respected. And then he comes in, and we're now laughed at. We're like a bunch of stupid people. What happened to the United States' reputation under this man's leadership is horrible, including weaponization, which I'm sure at some point you'll be talking about, where he goes after his political opponent because he can't beat him fair and square.
You have 80 seconds left. My question was, what do you say to those voters who believe that you violated your constitutional oath through your actions and inaction on January 6, 2021, and worry that you'll do it again?
Well, I didn't say that to anybody. I said peacefully and patriotically. And Nancy Pelosi, if you just watched the news from 2 days ago, on tape to her daughter, who's a documentary filmmaker, they say, but she's saying, oh, no, it's my responsibility. I was responsible for this. Because I offered her 10,000 soldiers or National Guard, and she turned them down. And the mayor of, in writing, by the way, the mayor, in writing, turned it down, the mayor of D.C. They turned it down. I offered 10,000 because I could see, I had virtually nothing to do. They asked me to go make a speech. I could see what was happening. Everybody was saying they're going to be there on January 6th. They're going to be there. And I said, you know what? There's a lot of people coming. You could feel it. You could feel it, too, and you could feel it. And I said, they ought to have some National Guard or whatever. And I offered it to her. And she now admits that she turned it down. And it was the same day she was, I don't know, she can't be very happy with her daughter because it made her into a liar. She said, I take full responsibility for January 6th.
President Biden?
Look, he encouraged those folks to go up on Capitol Hill, number one. I sat in the dining room off the Oval Office. He sat there for 3 hours watching, begging, being begged by his vice president and a number of his colleagues on the Republican side as well to do something, to call for a stop, to end it. Instead, they talked about these people being patriots and great patrons of America. In fact, he says he'll now forgive them for what they've done. They've been convicted. He says he wants to commute their sentences and say that no. But he went to every single court in the nation. I don't know how many cases, scores of cases, including the Supreme Court. And they said, no, this guy is responsible for doing what was done. He did do a damn thing. And these people should be in jail. And they should be the ones who are being held accountable. And he wants to let them all out. And now he says if he loses again, such a whiner that he is, that it could be a bloodbath.
Thank you, President Biden. President Trump?
What they've done to some people that are so innocent, you ought to be ashamed of yourself. What you have done, how you've destroyed the lives of so many people. When they ripped down Portland, when they ripped down many other cities, you go to Minnesota, Minneapolis, what they've done there, with the fires all over the city. If I didn't bring in the National Guard, that city would have been destroyed. When you look at all of they took over big chunks of Seattle. I was all set to bring in the National Guard. They heard that, they saw them coming, and they left immediately. What he said about this whole subject is so off. Peacefully patriotic. One other thing. The Unselect Committee, which is basically two horrible Republicans that are all gone now, out of office, and Democrats, all Democrats, they destroyed and deleted all of the information they found because they found out we were right. We were right. And they deleted and destroyed all of the information. They should go to jail for that. If a Republican did that, they'd go to jail.
Thank you, President Trump. President Biden, I want to give you a minute.
The only person on this stage is a convicted felon is the man I'm looking at right now. And the fact of the matter is, what he's telling you is simply not true. The fact is that there was no effort on his part to stop what was going on up in Capitol Hill. And all those people, every one of those who were convicted, deserves to be convicted. The idea that they didn't kill somebody, just went in and broke down doors, broke the windows, occupied offices, turned over desks, turned them over statues. The idea that those people are patriots, come on. When I asked him the first two debates we had, first time around, I said, will you denounce the Proud Boys? He said, no, I'll tell them to stand by. The idea he's refusing, will you denounce these guys? Will you denounce the people we're talking about now? Will you denounce the people who attacked that Capitol? What are you going to do?
I'm going to give you a minute, President Trump, for a follow-up question I have. After a jury convicted you of 34 felonies last month, you said if reelected, you would, quote, have every right to go after, unquote, your political opponents. You just talked about members of the Select Committee on January 6th going to jail. Your main political opponent is standing on stage with you tonight. Can you clarify exactly what it means about you feeling you have every right to go after your political opponents?
Well, I said my retribution is going to be success. We're going to make this country successful again, because right now it's a failing nation. My retribution is going to be success. But when he talks about a convicted felon, his son is a convicted felon at a very high level. His son is convicted, going to be convicted probably numerous other times. Should have been convicted before, but his Justice Department let the statute of limitations lapse on the most important things. But he could be a convicted felon as soon as he gets out of office. Joe could be a convicted felon with all of the things that he's done. He's done horrible things. All of the death caused at the border, telling the Ukrainian people that we're going to want $1 billion or you change the prosecutor. Otherwise, you're not getting $1 billion. If I ever said that, that's quid pro quo. That we're not going to do anything. We're not going to give you $1 billion unless you change your prosecutor having to do with the son. This man is a criminal. This man, you're lucky. You're lucky. I did nothing wrong. We'd have a system that was rigged and disgusting. I did nothing wrong.
Thank you, President Trump. President Biden, you have said, I'm coming right to you, sir. Well, you want to respond? Go ahead. I'll give you a minute to respond.
The idea that I did anything wrong relative to what you're talking about is outrageous. It's simply a lie, number one. Number two, the idea that you have a right to seek retribution against any American just because you're president is wrong. It's simply wrong. No president's ever spoken like that before. No president in our history has spoken like that before. Number three, the crimes that you are still charged with, and think of all the civil penalties you have. How many billions of dollars do you owe in civil penalties for molesting a woman in public, for doing a whole range of things, of having sex with a porn star on the night while your wife was pregnant? I mean, what are you talking about? You have the morals of an alley cat.
Give you a minute, sir.
I didn't have sex with a porn star, number one. Number two, that was a case that was started and moved. They moved a high-ranking official, a DOJ, into the Manhattan DA's office to start that case. That case is going to be appealed and won. We had a very terrible judge, a horrible judge, Democrat. The prosecutor were all high-ranking Democrats, appointed people, and both the civil and the criminal. He basically went after his political opponent because he thought it was going to damage me. But when the public found out about these cases, because they understand it better than he does, he has no idea what these cases are. But when they found out about these cases, you know what they did? My poll numbers went up, way up. You know that because you're reporting it. And we took in more money in the last 2 weeks than we've ever taken in the history of any campaign. I don't think any campaign has ever taken. Hundreds of millions of dollars came pouring in because the public knows it's a scam and it's a guy that's after his political opponent because he can't win fair and square.
Thank you, President Trump. President Biden, you have said, quote, Donald Trump and his MAGA Republicans are determined to destroy American democracy. Do you believe that the tens of millions of Americans who are likely to vote for President Trump will be voting against American democracy?
The more they know about what he's done, yes. The more they know about what he's done. And there's a lot more coming. He's got a lot of cases down the road coming around. He's got a whole range of issues he has to face. I don't know what the juries will do, but I do know he has a real problem. And so the fact that, could you ever think you heard any president say that I'm going to seek retribution? Do you ever hear any president say that I thought Hitler had some good ideas? What got me involved to run in the first place after my son had died, I decided in Iraq, because of Iraq, I said I wasn't going to run again until I saw what happened in Charlottesville, Virginia. People coming out of the woods carrying swastikas on torches, and singing the same anti-Semitic bile they sang when back in Germany. And and the young woman got killed. They spoke to the mother, and they asked him, they said, what do you think of those people? The people the ones who got killed, the one who tried to stop it, and the ones, he said, I think they're fine people on both sides. What American president would ever say, Nazis coming out of fields, carrying torches, singing the same anti-Semitic bile, carrying swastikas, were fine people? And this is a guy who says Hitler's done some good things. I'd like to know what they are. The good things Hitler's done, that's what he said. This guy has no sense of American democracy.
President Trump.
Jake, both of you know that story has been totally wiped out, because when you see the sentence, it said 100% exoneration on that. So he just keeps it going. He says he ran because of Charlottesville. He didn't run because of Charlottesville. He ran because it was his last chance. He's not equipped to be president. You know it, and I know it. It's ridiculous. We have a debate. We're trying to justify his presidency. His presidency is, without question, the worst president, the worst presidency in the history of our country. We shouldn't be having a debate about it. There's nothing to debate. He made up the Charlottesville story, and you'll see it's debunked all over the place. Every reasonable anchor has debunked it. And just the other day it came out where it was fully debunked. It's a nonsense story. He knows that, and he didn't run because of Charlottesville. He used that as an excuse to run.
President Biden.
And debunked. It happened. All you have to do is listen to what was said at the time. And the idea that somehow that's the only reason I ran because I was worried a guy like this guy could get elected. If he thought they were good people coming out of that forest, carrying those woods, carrying those torches, then he didn't deserve to be president. Didn't deserve to be president at all. And the idea that he's talking about all this being fabricated, we saw with our own eyes. We saw what happened on January 6th. We saw the people breaking through the windows. We saw people occupying his own vice president. Look, there's a reason why 40 of his 44 top cabinet officers refused to endorse him this time. His vice president hasn't endorsed him this time. So why? Why? They know him well. They serve with him. Why are they not endorsing him?
Thank you, President Biden. We're going to be right back with more from the CNN Presidential Debate.
Electorate, let's get the job done.
Mother Teresa could not beat these charges.
Welcome to the Trump Trials Sidebar, a new podcast from the Washington Post. Hi, I'm Libby Casey, and every week, alongside Rhonda Colvin and James Hohman, we break down the latest news and legal battles as Donald Trump ramps up his presidential campaign. The ramifications are serious.
The first time a U.S. president is in court as a defendant.
But we also have some fun. So Rhonda, if you could have any job in the court other than journalist, what would it be?
I would enjoy being the bailiff.
Nobody messes with the bailiff.
No one, you've never read a story about someone messing with the bailiff.
Our colleagues share their inside scoops. Do you have a sense that the jury has that weight bearing on them?
And they see all of us. They know that they're part of history.
And stick around to get real. What are some of the weird nuggets and things you've learned about jurors this week?
There was a guy talking about his public access TV show.
Watch the Trump Trials Sidebar on YouTube or listen to us on your favorite podcast platform today.
I'm Cleve Wootson. I'm a reporter for the Washington Post. I work for the White House team. I wanted to come to the Washington Post because it's some of the best journalism that's going on in America. A typical day at the Post on the White House beat can sometimes be anything but typical. If the president is in town, I'm also in town. If the president is traveling, I or one of my colleagues are also traveling. I'm just writing about not just what he's doing, but also writing about the impact of what he's doing and how voters, how Americans feel about that. If I had to describe the political team here, one thing that's really unique about our coverage, we have hypotheses, but we don't have assumptions. Trying to figure out where people actually are as opposed to where we assume they are, I think is something that makes us really distinct. Critical, objective journalism is really important at this point because everyone's trying to sell you something. And what we try to do is to just call it like it is. This is what is going on in your world and the information you need to make your own informed decision.
Democracy is on the ballot. Your freedom is on the ballot.
I am your warrior. I am your justice. I am your retribution. I am your retribution.
The 2024 election is in full swing. For every key campaign moment, The Washington Post is there, bringing you live coverage with insight and analysis, from landmark Supreme Court decisions to the sentencing of Donald Trump. We'll be on location reporting live from the Republican and Democratic national conventions and the presidential and vice presidential debates. It all leads up to our 2024 Election Night Special, providing real-time race calls, live updates from our reporters on the ground, monitoring the pivotal races that will determine the balance of power in Washington and the future of our country. No one covers politics and elections like the Washington Post, because democracy dies in darkness.
Welcome back to the CNN Presidential Debate live from Georgia. Let's talk about persistent challenges you both faced in your first terms and you'd certainly face again in a second term. President Biden, while black unemployment dropped to a record low under your presidency, black families still earn far less than white families. Black mothers are still 3 times more likely to die from pregnancy-related causes, and black Americans are imprisoned at 5 times the rate of white Americans. What do you say to black voters who are disappointed that you haven't made more progress?
They acknowledge they made a lot of progress, number one. The fact of the matter is there's more small black businesses that have been started than any time in history. Number two, the wages of black unemployment is the lowest level it's been in a long, long time. Number three, we're providing housing for black Americans and dealing with the segregation that exists among these corporations that collude to keep people out of their houses. And in addition to that, we find that the impact on the choice that black families have to make relative to child care is incredibly difficult. When we did the first major piece of legislation in the past, I was able to reduce black child care costs. I cut them in half. We got to make sure we provide for child care costs. We got to make sure, because when you provide those child care protections, you increase economic growth because more people can be in the job market. So there's more to be done, considerably more to be done. But we've done a great deal so far, and I'm not letting up, and they know it.
You have 49 seconds left. What do you say to black voters who are disappointed with the progress so far?
I say I don't blame them for being disappointed. Inflation is still hurting them badly. For example, I provided for the idea that any black family, first-time home buyer, should get a $10,000 tax credit to be able to buy their first home so they can get started. I made sure that we're in a situation where all those black families and those black individuals who had to take out student loans that were ballooning, that if they were engaged in nursing, and anything having to do with volunteerism, if they paid their bills for 10 years on their student debt, all the rest is forgiven after 10 years. Millions have benefited from that. And we're going to do a whole lot more for black families.
Thank you, President Trump.
And he caused the inflation. He's blaming inflation, and he's right, it's been very bad. He caused the inflation, and it's killing black families and Hispanic families and just about everybody. It's killing people. They can't buy groceries anymore. They can't. You look at the cost of food where it's doubled and tripled and quadrupled. They can't live. They're not living anymore. He caused this inflation. I gave him a country with essentially no inflation. It was perfect. It was so good. All he had to do is leave it alone. He destroyed it with his Green New scam and all this money that's being thrown out the window. He caused inflation. As sure as you're sitting there, the fact is that his big kill on the black people is the millions of people that he's allowed to come in through the border. They're taking black jobs now, and it could be 18, it could be 19, and even 20 million people. They're taking black jobs, and they're taking Hispanic jobs, and you haven't seen it yet, but you're going to see something that's going to be the worst in our history.
Thank you. President Biden?
There was no inflation when I became president. You know why? The economy was flat on its back. 15% unemployment. He decimated the economy, absolutely decimated the economy. That's why there was no inflation at the time. There were no jobs. We provided thousands of millions of jobs for individuals who are in all communities, including minority communities. We made sure that they have health insurance. We have covered, the ACA has increased. I made sure that they're $8,000 per person in a family to get written off for the health care. But this guy wants to eliminate that. They tried 50 times. He wants to get rid of the ACA again, and they're going to try again if they win. You find ourselves in a position where the idea that we're not doing any, we put more police on the street than any administration has. He wants to cut the cops. We're providing for equity and making sure people have a shot to make it. There's a lot going on, but in inflation, he caused it by his tremendous malfeasance in the way he handled the pandemic.
Thank you. Another persistent challenge is the climate crisis. 2023 was the hottest year in recorded history, and communities across the country are confronting the devastating effects of extreme heat, intensifying wildfires, stronger hurricanes, and rising sea levels. Former President Trump, you've vowed to end your opponent's climate initiatives, but will you take any action as president to slow the climate crisis?
Well, let me just go back to what he said about the police, how close the police are to him. Almost every police group in the nation from every state is supporting Donald J. Trump. Almost every police group. And what he's done to the black population is horrible, including the fact that for 10 years he called them super predators. We can't, in the 1990s, we can't forget that. Super predators was his name, and he called it to them for 10, and they've taken great offense at it, and now they see it happening. But when they see what I did for criminal justice reform and for the historically black colleges and universities, where I funded them and got them all funded, and the opportunity zones with Tim, as you know, Tim Scott was incredible. He did a great job, great senator from South Carolina. He came to me with the idea, and it was a great idea. It's one of the most successful economic development acts ever in the country, opportunity zones. And the biggest beneficiary are blacks. And that's why we have the best numbers with them in maybe ever. They're saying ever. I read this morning where ever, the best numbers. He's lost much of the black population because he's done a horrible job for black people. He's also done a horrible job for Hispanics. But wait till you see these millions of people pouring into our country, and they're going to take the jobs, and it's already started, and you haven't seen anything yet. It's a disaster.
You've 38 seconds left. President Trump, will you take any action as president to slow the climate crisis?
So I want absolutely immaculate clean water, and I want absolutely clean air, and we had it. We had H2O. We had the best numbers ever, and we were using all forms of energy, all forms, everything. And yet, during my 4 years, I had the best environmental numbers ever. And my top environmental people gave me that statistic just before I walked on the stage, actually.
I don't know where the hell he's been. The idea that anything he said is true. I've passed the most extensive climate change legislation in history. We find ourselves, and by the way, black colleges, I came up with $15 billion for HBCUs, historic black universities and colleges, because they don't have the kind of contributors that they have to build these laboratories and the like. Any black student is capable in college of doing any white student can do. They just don't have the money, but now they'll be able to get those jobs in high tech. We're in a situation where the idea that he is claiming to have done something that had the cleanest water, he hadn't done a damn thing for the environment. He pulled out of the Paris Peace Accord, Climate Accord. I immediately joined it because if we reach 1.5 degrees Celsius at any one point, there's no way back. The only existential threat to humanity is climate change, and he didn't do a damn thing about it. He wants to undo all that I've done.
The Paris Accord was going to cost us $1 trillion, and China nothing, and Russia nothing, and India nothing. It was a ripoff of the United States. And I ended it because I didn't want to waste that money because they treat us horribly. We were the only ones. It was costing us money. Nobody else was paying into it. And it was a disaster. But everything that he said just now, I'll give you an example. I heard him say before insulin. I'm the one that got the insulin down for the seniors. I took care of the seniors. What he's doing is destroying all of our medical programs because the migrants coming in, they want everybody. And look, I have the biggest heart on the stage, I guarantee you that. And I want to take care of people. But we're destroying our country. They're taking over our schools, our hospitals, and they're going to be taking over Social Security. He is destroying Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid.
The idea is that we, in fact, we were the only ones of consequence who were not members of the Paris Accord. How can we do anything if we're not able to, the United States can't get its pollution under control? One of the largest polluters in the world, number one. We're making significant progress. By 2035, we will have cut pollution in half. We have made significant progress, and we're continuing to make progress. We set up a climate corps for thousands of young people who will learn how to deal with climate, just like the Peace Corps. And we're moving in directions that are going to significantly change the elements of cause of pollution. But the idea that he claims that he has the biggest heart up here and he's really concerned about pollution and about climate, I've not seen any indication of that. And by the way, with regard to prescription drugs, one company agreed that they would reduce the price to $35, which I was calling for, one, voluntarily. I made sure every company in the world, every pharmaceutical company, cannot have to pay.
Thank you.
And by the way,
so every day, millions of Americans struggle just to make ends meet. For many older Americans, Social Security provides a critical lifeline. President Biden, if nothing is done to Social Security, seniors will see their benefits cut in just over 10 years. Will you name tonight one specific step that you're willing to take to keep Social Security solvent?
yes, make the very wealthy begin to pay their fair share. Right now, everybody making under $170,000 pays 6% of their income, of their paycheck, every single time they get a paycheck from the time of the first one they get when they're 18 years old. The idea that they're going to, I've been proposing that everybody, they pay, the millionaires pay 1%. 1%. So no one I would not raise the cost of Social Security for anybody under $400,000. After that, I began to make the wealthy begin to pay their fair share by increasing from 1% beyond to be able to guarantee the program for life.
So you still have 82 seconds left. Are there any other measures that you think that would be able to help keep Social Security solvent, or is that one enough?
Well, no, that one enough will keep it solvent, but the biggest thing I'll do if we defeat this man, because he wants to get rid of Social Security. He thinks there's plenty to cut in Social Security. He's wanted to cut Social Security and Medicare both times. And that's what. And if you look at the program put forward by the House Republican caucus that he, I believe, supports, is in fact want to cut it as well. The idea that we don't need to protect our seniors is ridiculous. And by the way, the American public has greater health care coverage today than ever before. And on the ACA, as I said, you're in a circumstance where 400,000 people, 40 million people would not have insurance because they have a pre-existing condition. The only thing that allows them to have that insurance is the fact that they, in fact, are part of the ACA. And by the way, the other thing is, we're in a situation where we talk about education for black communities. I've raised the amount of money for Pell Grants by another $8,000. So anybody making under $70,000 a year is going to be able to get $15,000 toward their tuition. He just doesn't know what he's talking about.
Thank you, President Biden. President Trump.
So I've dealt with politicians all my life. I've been on this side of the equation for the last 8 years. I've never seen anybody lie like this guy. He lies. I've never seen it. He could look you in the face about so many other things, too. And we mentioned the laptop. We mentioned Russia, Ukraine. Everything he does is a lie. It's misinformation and disinformation. The losers and suckers story that he made up is a total lie on the military. It's a disgrace. But Social Security he's destroying it because millions of people are pouring into our country, and they're putting them onto Social Security. They're putting them onto Medicare, Medicaid. They're putting them in our hospitals. They're taking the place of our citizens. What they're doing to the VA, to our veterans, is unbelievable. Our veterans are living in the street, and these people are living in luxury hotels. He doesn't know what he's doing, and it's really coming back. I've never seen such anger in our country before.
President Biden?
The idea that veterans are not being taken care of, I told you before. And by the way, when I said suckers and losers, he acknowledged after that he fired that general. That general got fired because he's the one that acknowledged that that's what he said. He was the one standing with Trump when he said it, number one. Number two, the idea that we're going to be in a situation where all these millions and millions, the way he talks about it, illegal aliens are coming into the country and taking away our jobs. There's a reason why we have the fastest growing economy in the world, the reason why we have the most successful economy in the world. We're doing better than any other nation in the world. And by the way, those 15 Nobel laureates he talked about being phony, those 15 Nobel laureates, economists, they all said that if Trump is reelected, we're likely to have a recession, and inflation is going to increasingly go up. And by the way, worst president in history, 159 presidential scholars voted him the worst president in the history of the United States of America.
President Biden, thank you so much. Let's turn to the cost of child care, which many American families struggle to afford. President Trump, both you and President Biden have tried to address this issue, but the average cost of child care in this country has risen to more than $11,000 a year per child. For many families, the cost of child care for 2 children is more than their rent. In your second term, what would you do to make child care more affordable?
Just to go back, the general got fired because he was no good. And if he said that, that's why he made it up. But we have 19 people that said I didn't say it, and they're very highly respected, much more so than him. The other thing is, he doesn't fire people. He never fired people. I've never seen him fire anybody. I did fire a lot. I fired Comey because he was no good. I fired a lot of the top people at the FBI, drained the swamp. They were no good. Not easy to fire people. You'd pay a price for it, but they were no good. I inherited these people. I didn't put them there. I didn't put Comey there. He was no good. I fired him. This guy hasn't fired anybody. He never fires. He should have fired every military man that was involved with the Afghanistan horror show, the most embarrassing moment in the history of our country. He didn't fire. Did you fire anybody? Did you fire anybody that's on the border, that's allowed us to have the worst border in the history of the world? Did anybody get fired for allowing 18 million people, many from prisons, many from mental institutions? Did you fire anybody that allowed our country to be destroyed? Joe, our country is being destroyed as you and I sit up here and waste a lot of time on this debate. This shouldn't be a debate. He is the worst president. He just said about me because I said it. But look, he's the worst president in the history of our country. He's destroyed our country. Now all of a sudden he's trying to get a little tough on the border. He came out with a nothing deal, and it reduced it a little bit, like this much. It's insignificant. He wants open borders. He wants our country to either be destroyed or he wants to pick up those people as voters. And I don't think we just can't let it happen. If he wins this election, our country doesn't have a chance, not even a chance, of coming out of this rut. We probably won't have a country left anymore. That's how bad it is. He is the worst in history by far.
Thank you, President Trump. President Biden?
We're the most admired country in the world. We're the United States of America. There's nothing beyond our capacity. We have the finest military in the history of the world, the finest in the history of the world. No one thinks we're weak. No one wants to screw around with us. Nobody, number one. Number two, the idea that we're talking about worst presidents. I wasn't joking. Look it up or go online. 159 or 58, don't hold me the exact number, presidential historians, they've had meetings and they voted who's the worst president in American history. One through best to worst. They said he was the worst in all of American history. That's a fact. That's not conjecture. He can argue they're wrong, but that's what they voted. The idea that he is doing anything to deal with child care, he did virtually nothing to child care. We should significantly increase the child care tax credit. We should significantly increase the availability of women and men or single parents to be able to go back to work, and we should encourage businesses to have.
Thank you, President Biden. President Trump, the question was about what would you do to make child care more affordable, if you want to take your minute.
Just so you understand, we have polling, we have other things that they rate him the worst because what he's done is so bad. And they rate me, I'll show you, I will show you, and they rate me one of the best, okay? And if I'm given another 4 years, I will be the best. I think I'll be the best. Nobody's ever created an economy like us. Nobody ever cut taxes like us. He's the only one I know. He wants to raise your taxes by 4 times. He wants to raise everybody's taxes by 4 times. He wants the Trump tax cuts to expire. So everybody, including the 2 of you, are going to pay 4 to 5 times. Nobody ever heard of this before. All my life, I'd grow up and I'd see politicians talking about cutting taxes. When we cut taxes, as I said, we did more business. Apple and all these companies, they were bringing money back into our country. The worst president in history by far, and everybody knows it.
President Biden?
Look, the fact of the matter is that he's dead wrong about, he's increased the tariff, he will increase the taxes on middle-class people. I said I'd never raise a tax on anybody making less than $400,000. I didn't. But this tariff is 10% tariffs. Everything coming into the country, you know what the economists say? That's going to cost the average American $2,500 a year more because they're going to have to pay the difference in food and all the things that were imported. Number 2, he's in a situation where he talks about how he has not raised, he's somehow helped the middle class. The middle class have been devastated by you. Now you want a new tax cut of $5 trillion over the next 10 years, which is going to fundamentally bankrupt the country. You had the largest deficit of any president in American history, number 1. Number 2, you have not, in fact, made any contact, any progress with China. We are the lowest trade deficit with China since 2010.
Thank you, President Biden.
You lost.
Thank you, President Biden. Let's discuss an epidemic impacting millions of Americans that both of you have made a top priority in your first term, the opioid crisis. And for both of you, the number of overdose deaths in this country has gone up. Under your term, it went up. Under your term, it has gone up. Former President Trump, despite the efforts that both of you have made, more than 100,000 Americans are dying from overdoses every year, primarily from fentanyl and other opioids. What will you do to help Americans right now in the throes of addiction who are struggling to get the treatment they need?
To finish up, we now have the largest deficit in the history of our country under this guy. We have the largest deficit with China. He gets paid by China. He's a Manchurian candidate. He gets money from China. So I think he's afraid to deal with them or something. But do you notice he never took out my tariffs because we bring in so much money with the tariffs that I imposed on China. He never took them away. He can't because it's too much money. It's tremendous. And we saved our steel industries, and there was more to come, but he hasn't done that. But he hasn't cut the tariffs because he can't, because it's too much money. But he's got the largest deficit in the history of our country, and he's got the worst situation with China. China's going to own us if you keep allowing them to do what they're doing to us as a country. They are killing us as a country, Joe, and you can't let that happen. You're destroying our country.
So, President Trump, you have 67 seconds left. The question was, what are you going to do to help Americans in the throes of addiction right now who are struggling to get the treatment they need?
Jake, we were doing very well at addiction until the COVID came along. We had the 2.5, almost 3 years of like nobody's ever had before, any country, in every way. And then we had to get tough. And it was the drugs pouring across the border it started to increase. We got great equipment. We bought the certain dog that's the most incredible thing that you've ever seen, the way they can spot it. We did a lot, and we were getting very low numbers, very, very low numbers. Then he came along. The numbers, have you seen the numbers now? It's not only the 18 million people that I believe is even low because the gotaways, they don't even talk about gotaways. But the numbers of the amount of drugs and human trafficking in women coming across our border, the worst thing I've ever seen, at numbers that nobody's ever seen under him because the border's so bad. But the number of drugs coming across our border now is the largest we've ever had by far.
President Trump, thank you. President Biden?
Fentanyl and the byproducts of fentanyl went down for a while. And I wanted to make sure we use the machinery that can detect fentanyl, these big machines that roll over everything that comes across the border. and it costs a lot of money. That was part of this deal we put together, this bipartisan deal. More fentanyl machines, more be able to detect drugs, more numbers of agents, more numbers of all the people at the border. And when we had that deal done, he called his Republican colleagues, said, "Don't do it. It's going to hurt me politically." No, he never argued it's not a good bill. It's a really good bill. We need those machines. We need those machines. And we're coming down very hard in every country in Asia in terms of precursors for fentanyl. And Mexico is working with us to make sure they don't have the technology to be able to put it together. That's what we have to do. We need those machines.
Thank you, President Biden. President Trump, and again, the question is about Americans in the throes of addiction right now, struggling to get the treatment they need.
Well, because this does pertain to it. He ended Remain in Mexico. He ended catch and release. I made it catch and release in Mexico, not catch and release here. We had so many things that we had done, hard negotiations with Mexico, and I got it all for nothing. It's just like when you have a hostage. We always pay $6 billion for a hostage. Every time we say there's a hostage. Now we have a hostage, a Wall Street Journal reporter, I think a good guy, and he's over there because Putin is laughing at this guy, probably asking for billions of dollars for the reporter. I will have him out very quickly, as soon as I take office. Before I take office, I said by literally as soon as I win the election, I will have that reporter out. He should have had him out a long time ago, but Putin's probably asking for billions and billions of dollars because this guy pays it every time. We had 2 cases where we paid $6 billion for 5 people. I got 58 people out, and I paid essentially nothing.
Thank you, President Trump. Dana?
Let's turn to concerns that voters have about each of you. President Biden, you would be 86 at the end of your 2nd term. How do you address concerns about your capability to handle the toughest job in the world well into your 80s?
Well, first of all, I spent half my career being criticized being the youngest person in politics. I was the 2nd youngest person ever elected to the United States Senate, and now I'm the oldest. This guy's 3 years younger and a lot less competent. I think that just look at the record. Look at what I've done. Look how I've turned around the horrible situation he left me. As I said, 15 million new jobs, 800,000 manufacturing jobs, more investment in America, over billions of dollars in private investment in enterprises that we are growing. By the way, we brought an awful lot of people. The whole idea of computer chips, we used to have 40% of the market. We invented those chips, and we lost it because he was sending people to find the cheapest jobs overseas and to bring home a product. So I went to South Korea. I convinced Samsung to invest billions of dollars here in the United States. And guess what? Those fabs, they call to build these chips, those fabs pay over $100,000. You don't need a college degree for them. And there's billions, about $40 billion already being invested and being built right now in the United States, creating significant jobs for Americans from all over the world.
President Biden, you have 40 seconds left. Would you like to add anything?
Yeah, I would. The idea that somehow we are this failing country. I never heard a president talk like this before. We're the envy of the world. Name me a single major country president who wouldn't trade places with the United States of America for all our problems and all our opportunities. We're the most progressive country in the world in getting things done. We're the strongest country in the world. We're a country in the world who keeps our word, and everybody trusts us, all of our allies, and those who he coddles up to, from Kim Jong-un, he sends love letters to, and Putin, et cetera. They don't want to screw around with us.
Thank you. Former President Trump, to follow up, you would be 82 at the end of your 2nd term. What do you say to voters who have concerns about your capabilities to serve?
Well, I took 2 tests, cognitive tests. I aced them, both of them, as you know. We made it public. He took none. I'd like to see him take one, just one, a real easy one. Like go through the first 5 questions. He couldn't do it. But I took 2 cognitive tests. I took physical exams every year. And, you know, we knock on wood wherever we may have wood, that I'm in very good health. I just won 2 club championships, not even senior, 2 regular club championships. To do that, you have to be quite smart, and you have to be able to hit the ball a long way, and I do it. He doesn't do it. He can't hit a ball 50 yards. He challenged me to a golf match. He can't hit a ball 50 yards. I think I'm in very good shape. I feel that I'm as in good a shape as I was 25, 30 years ago. Actually, I'm probably a little bit lighter, but I'm in as good a shape as I was years ago. I feel very good. I feel the same. But I was willing to take a cognitive test. And you know what? If I didn't do well, I aced them. Dr. Ronnie Jackson, who's a great guy when he was White House doctor. And then I took another one, a similar one. And one of them said they've never seen anybody ace him.
Thank you. President Biden?
You can see he is 6'5" and only 223 pounds, or 235 pounds. Well, you said 6'4", 200. Well, anyway, that's it. Anyway, just take a look at what he says he is, and take a look at what he is. Look, I'd be happy to have a driving contest with him. I got my handicap, which when I was vice president, down to a 6. But by the way, I told you before, I'm happy to play golf with you if you carry your own bag. Think you can do it?
That's the biggest lie that he's a 6 handicap of all.
I was an 8 handicap.
Yeah.
8.
Never.
But I have, you know how many?
I've seen you swing. I know you swing.
Let's
not act like children.
President Trump, we're going to turn
Let's not act like children.
to a specific concern that voters have about you. Will you pledge tonight that once all legal challenges have been exhausted, that you will accept the results of this election, regardless of who wins, and you will say right now that political violence in any form is unacceptable?
Well, I shouldn't have to say that, but of course I believe that. It's totally unacceptable. And if you would see my statements that I made on Twitter at the time, and also my statement that I made in the Rose Garden, you would say it's one of the strongest statements you've ever seen. In addition to the speech I made in front of, I believe, the largest crowd I've ever spoken to, and I will tell you, nobody ever talks about that. They talk about a relatively small number of people that went to the Capitol, and in many cases were ushered in by the police. And as Nancy Pelosi said, it was her responsibility, not mine. She said that loud and clear. But the answer is, if the election is fair, free, and I want that more than anybody. And I'll tell you something. I wish he was a great president, because I wouldn't be here right now. I'd be at one of my many places enjoying myself. I wouldn't be under indictment because I wouldn't have been his political opponent, because he indicted me because I was his opponent. I wish he was a great president. I would rather have that. I wouldn't be here. I don't mind being here. But the only reason I'm here is he's so bad as a president that I'm going to make America great again. We're going to make America great again. We're a failing nation right now. We're a seriously failing nation. And we're a failing nation because of him. His policies are so bad. His military policies are insane. They're insane. These are wars that will never end with him. He will drive us into World War III, and we're closer to World War III than anybody can imagine. We are very, very close to World War III, and he's driving us there. And Kim Jong-un and President Xi of China, Kim Jong-un of North Korea, all of these, Putin, they don't respect him. They don't fear him. They have nothing going with this gentleman, and he's going to drive us into World War III.
You want a World War III, let him follow and win, and let Putin say, do what you want, NATO. Just do what you want. There's a thing called Article 5. An attack on one is an attack on all, and required response. The idea, I can't think of a single major leader in the world who wouldn't trade places with the job I've done and what they've done. Because we are a powerful nation. We have wonderful people. It's because of the people, not me. It's because of the American people. They're capable of anything, and they step up when they're needed. And right now, we're needed. We're needed to protect the world because our own safety is at stake. And again, you want to have a war, just let Putin go ahead and take Kyiv, make sure they move on, see what happens in Poland, Hungary, and other places along that border. Then you have a war.
President Trump, as I come back to you for a follow-up, the question was, will you accept the results of this election, regardless of who wins?
Just to finish what he said, if I might, Russia, they took a lot of land from Bush. They took a lot of land from Obama and Biden. They took no land, nothing from Trump, nothing. He knew not to do it. He's not going to play games with me. He knew that. I got along with him very well, but he knew not to play games. He took nothing from me. But now he's going to take the whole thing from this man right here. That's a war that should have never started. It would have never started, ever, with me. And he's going to take Ukraine. And, you know, you asked me a question before, would you do this? He's got us in such a bad position right now with Ukraine and Russia, because Ukraine's not winning that war. He said, I will never settle until such time. They're running out of people. They're running out of soldiers. They've lost so many people. It's so sad. They've lost so many people, and they've lost those gorgeous cities with the golden domes that are 1,000 years old, all because of him and stupid decisions. Russia would have never attacked if I were
President Trump,
president.
the question was, will you accept the results of the election, regardless of who wins? Yes or no, please.
If it's a fair and legal and good election, absolutely. I would have much rather accepted these, but the fraud and everything else was ridiculous. And if you want, we'll have a news conference on it in a week, or we'll have another one of these in a week. But I will absolutely, there's nothing I'd rather do. It would be much easier for me to do that than I'm running again. I wasn't really going to run until I saw the horrible job he did. He's destroying our country. I would be very happy to be someplace else, in a nice location someplace. And again, no indictments, no political opponent stuff, because it's the only way he thinks he can win. But unfortunately, it's driven up my numbers and driven them up to a very high level because the people understand it.
Well, let's see what your numbers are when this election is over. Let's see. You're a whiner. When you lost the first time, you continued, you appealed and appealed to courts all across the country. Not one single court in America said any of your claims had any merit, state or local, none. But you continue to provoke this lie about somehow there's all this misrepresentation, all this stealing. There is no evidence of that at all. And I tell you what, I doubt whether you'll accept it because you're such a whiner. The idea, if you lose again, you accepting anything, you can't stand the loss. Something snapped in you when you lost the last time.
We'll be right back with more from the CNN Presidential Debate, live from Georgia.
Right. Let's get the job done.
Mother Teresa could not beat these charges.
Welcome to the Trump Trials Sidebar, a new podcast from the Washington Post. Hi, I'm Libby Casey, and every week, alongside Rhonda Colvin and James Hohman, we break down the latest news and legal battles as Donald Trump ramps up his presidential campaign. The ramifications are serious.
The first time a U.S. president is in court as a defendant.
But we also have some fun. So Rhonda, if you could have any job in the court other than journalist, what would it be?
I would enjoy being the bailiff.
Nobody messes with the bailiff.
No one, you've never read a story about someone messing with the bailiff.
Our colleagues share their inside scoops. Do you have a sense that the jury has that weight bearing on them?
They see all of us. They know that they're a part of history.
And stick around to get real. What are some of the weird nuggets and things you've learned about jurors this week?
There was a guy talking about his public access TV show.
Watch the Trump Trials Sidebar on YouTube or listen to us on your favorite podcast platform today.
My name is Dylan Wells, and I'm a campaign reporter at The Washington Post. I wanted to join The Washington Post to work with the best political team in the business and cover the people who are actually going to determine who wins this election. Being out in the field is absolutely essential to covering the campaign. I'm constantly on the trail, going to different candidates' events, driving around the country, flying around the country. There's a lot of voters who are really hesitant about this general election. I would say my most interesting interviews in the past year covering the presidential race have not been with the candidates themselves, but with the voters who are out in the country and hearing about what issues are motivating or not motivating them to turn out to vote. I think for me, the greatest sense of accomplishment in my reporting comes when a reader is able to tell me that my story is how they better understood an issue. And I think just really being able to tell those stories that we might not otherwise hear from the campaign trail is really a privilege. And we're, as a campaign team, trying to tell those stories as much as possible.
Democracy is on the ballot. Your freedom is on the ballot.
I am your warrior. I am your justice. I am your retribution. I am your retribution.
The 2024 election is in full swing. For every key campaign moment, The Washington Post is there, bringing you live coverage with insight and analysis. From landmark Supreme Court decisions to the sentencing of Donald Trump. We'll be on location reporting live from the Republican and Democratic national conventions and the presidential and vice presidential debates. It all leads up to our 2024 election night special, providing real-time race calls, live updates from our reporters on the ground, monitoring the pivotal races that will determine the balance of power in Washington and the future of our country. No one covers politics and elections like the Washington Post, because democracy dies in darkness.
It is now time for the candidates to deliver their closing statements as predetermined by a coin toss. We're going to begin with you, President Biden. You have 2 minutes.
We've made significant progress from the debacle that was left by President Trump in his last term. We find ourselves in a situation where, number one, we have to make sure that we have a fair tax system. I ask anyone out there in the audience or anyone out watching this debate, do you think the tax system is fair? The fact is that I said nobody even making under $400,000 had a single penny increase in their taxes and will not. And if I'm reelected, that'll be the case again. But this guy has increased your taxes because of the deficit, number one. He's increased inflation because of the debacle he left after the way he handled the pandemic. And he finds himself in a position where he now wants to tax you more by putting a 10% tariff on everything that comes into the United States of America. What I did, when, for example, he wants to get rid of the ability of Medicare for us to be able to negotiate drug prices with the big pharma companies. Well, guess what? We got it down to $35 for insulin instead of $400. No more than $2,000 for every senior, no matter how much prescription they need. You know what that did? That reduced the federal debt by $160 billion over 10 years because the government doesn't have to pay the exorbitant prices. I'm going to make that available to every senior all along, it's happening now, and everybody in America. He wants to get rid of that. I'm going to make sure that we have child care. We're going to significantly increase the credit people have for child care. I'm going to make sure we do something about what we're doing on lead pipes and all the things that are causing health problems for people across the country. We're going to continue to fight to bring down inflation and give people a break.
Thank you, President Biden. President Trump, you now have 2 minutes for your closing statement.
Like so many politicians, this man is just a complainer. He said, we want to do this, we want to do that, we want to get rid of this tax, that tax. But he doesn't do anything. All he does is make our country unsafe by allowing millions and millions of people to pour in. Our military doesn't respect him. We look like fools in Afghanistan. We didn't stop Israel. It was such a horrible thing that would have never happened. It should have never happened. Iran was broke. Anybody that did business with Iran, including China, they couldn't do business with the United States. They all passed. Iran was broke. They had no money for Hamas or Hezbollah, for terror, no money whatsoever. Again, Ukraine should have never happened. He talks about all this stuff, but he didn't do it. For 3.5 years, we're living in hell. We have the Palestinians and we have everybody else rioting all over the place. You talk about Charlottesville. This is 100 times Charlottesville, 1,000 times. The whole country is exploding because of you, because they don't respect you, and they have to respect their president, and they don't respect you throughout the world. What we did was incredible. We rebuilt the military. We got the largest tax cut in history, the largest regulation cut in history. The reason he's got jobs is because I cut the regulations that gave jobs, but he's putting a lot of those regulations back on. All of the things that we've done, nobody's never seen anything like, even from a medical standpoint, right to try, where we can try space-age materials instead of going to Asia or going to Europe and trying to get, when you're terminally ill, now you can go and you can get something. You sign a document. They've been trying to get it for 42 years. But you know what we did for the military was incredible. Choice for our soldiers, where our soldiers, instead of waiting for 3 months to see a doctor, can go out and get themselves fixed up and readied up and take care of themselves, and they're living. And that's why I had the highest approval rating in the history of the VA. So all of these things, we're in a failing nation, but it's not going to be failing anymore. We're going to make it great again.
Thank you, former President Trump, President Biden. Stay with us because we have full analysis of this debate. Anderson Cooper and Aaron Burnett starts now on CNN.
Coverage from the Washington Post of CNN's presidential debate, and you can stay with us for analysis right here with the Washington Post team. I'm Libby Casey, and I'm in the studio with James Hohmann and J.M. Rieger, and our colleague Rhonda Colvin is live in Atlanta tonight. Well, President Joe Biden had to put to rest worries about his age, but at times he appeared to lose his train of thought and did not counter Donald Trump. Trump lied repeatedly, but wasn't fact-checked by the moderators and often not by Biden either. Let's talk right now. James, JM, top takeaways of this 90-minute debate. James?
It was a rough night for President Biden. Some of his aides were telling reporters that he has a cold. They didn't tell us that before the debate. I think the president sort of hit his stride in the back half enough so that people who are supporting Joe Biden are going to stick with him. But I think a lot of Americans are upset that these are the choices that they're left with going into November. And I think we're going to see a new round of doubts about whether it really makes sense for Democrats to rally behind Joe Biden.
Jam?
Age is a significant Achilles heel for President Biden, more so than Trump, even though they're only 3 years apart. That was reinforced tonight, especially in the first part of the debate when a lot of people were watching. That is where debates are as much about moments and about sort of the optics and the tenor. As much as folks may wish that they not be, that is what debates often are, what they often come down to. Biden really didn't have that sort of moment until, as James mentioned, sort of the latter half of the debate. Off the top, he looked, he was rambling. He was struggling through. He stopped suddenly at times. It was really striking to watch. Now, the second half of the debate, he seemed to really come into the format a little more, and Trump just rattled off falsehood after falsehood after falsehood, and we shouldn't minimize that here. But in terms of how this shapes the race, which is really what we're talking about, what's the impact of this? We don't know yet. We're going to know in the days and weeks ahead here. But this was not a good night off the top, especially for the Biden campaign.
Let's go to Rhonda Colvin, who's live in the spin room in Atlanta. And Rhonda, we'll certainly want to know what the chatter is from the spin room. But let's start with your analysis of tonight. You know, as you talk to voters heading into this, folks that you talked to wanted to hear about policies and ideas. But on even some of the strongest platforms that Democrats have, like abortion, Biden could not find his way through the woods to explain his position clearly and really gain some traction on that tonight. Let's hear more from you on what they did effectively and what they were not able to do tonight.
Yeah, that's actually what I was thinking about while I was watching this, is those voters I spoke to and other people I've spoke to while I've been here. People were really anticipating a night where they might be able to understand where these two men fall on certain policy issues. And Americans want to hear more about policy. This has been a race that has been very low on discussion of real policy. It's been a lot of drama, and Americans want to hear more. But we heard policy. The moderators kept to all sorts of different issues, from abortion, from the withdrawal from Afghanistan, from the wars going on, all sorts of things. But yet, did we get any truth? Are Americans now going to have to go home and do some homework, because we did have so many sweeping generalizations and mistruths from the former president, and Biden was not able to spend a lot of time on some of those things that Trump kept bringing up. I also think, to the point of JM and James there, about how age certainly was an issue going into this. And of course, when you are on stage under lights, age is very visible. That might not have been an area that Biden was able to overcome. But you also have to think about it that he is the incumbent. And so usually, in most, even regular cycles, it's harder for the incumbent in these situations because they are getting direct questions about what's going on now. And what's going on now is most salient in voters' minds. So Biden, even coming into this, had perhaps a higher bar to meet. But of course, as JM also noted, we cannot underestimate exactly what Trump was saying about all the mistruths about January 6th, about things people may have forgotten about. That certainly needs to be discussed in the coming days and fact-checked because he does have the advantage of a lot of people maybe not remembering some of those moments that were brought up. And he just, went over them.
Yep, we're actually going to do that right now. Let's fact-check this debate. Yeah, Trump did repeatedly lie. He was not fact-checked in real time. That was a decision by the moderators, James and JM, not to fact-check him. They left it to the candidates to check each other by having that rebuttal time. So let's look more closely at the statements of both candidates. Let's start with Donald Trump, James.
Yeah, and we want to be careful not to draw false equivalence because Donald Trump really did, in a lot of ways, try to gaslight people about the experience of his 4 years in office, about what he said on things like Charlottesville, about his role in January 6th, about kind of just baldly and aggressively saying that abortion, that everyone wanted it to return to the states and wanted to overturn Roe v. Wade, that Putin wouldn't have invaded Ukraine if he had been president. So there was just this sea of falsehoods that that frankly was hard to keep up with from Trump. And Biden also made several false statements that that are worth fact-checking as well.
Yeah, I mean, Biden at one point said that Trump wanted to eliminate Social Security. That's not true. Biden at one point seemed to suggest that the Border Patrol Union had endorsed him and then sort of tried to clean it up a little later. They had endorsed the bipartisan bill. They hadn't endorsed Biden's reelection and, in fact, came out with a tweet saying that they are not endorsing President Biden.
And never will.
And never will in this election. Earlier in the debate, he messed up the insulin price that it was capped at. But to your point, James, I mean, the bigger whoppers, quote unquote, in terms of falsehoods, things that not only we hear time and time again, but are bigger pieces of nonsense, I don't know, lack of a better word, from Trump were much more frequent and much more often. Trump talked a lot. There was focus on the economy about tariffs, and Trump was talking about how much money it's going to save the Americans. Most economists believe that tariffs are a tax on Americans, and in fact, the data bore that out when Trump was in office the first time. Now, Biden has kept a lot of those tariffs in place, so that's important to point out as well. The other thing that Trump kind of harped on over and over again on the economy was how he had the largest tax cut and the best economy. He did have a big tax cut that he put in place. The economy was doing well. Neither one of those were at the record highs that Trump acts like they are or were.
Let's bring in Rhonda Colvin to talk more about some of those decisions by the candidates to just run with things. Rhonda, it seemed like because nobody was fact-checking Trump, he just doubled down.
Yeah, certainly. That's exactly how it looked like it played out. I mean, there were so many things, as we've just been saying, it was almost like you could have whiplash just counting all the things that weren't truthful or were generalizations or, even whitewashing things that people did see clearly on their televisions or experience themselves, January 6th, Charlottesville. But again, there is some distance from those events. And, American voters are now thinking a lot of the economy, thinking of reproductive rights, things that are right in front of them right now. One area, too, at the beginning, the abortion issue came up, and we know from speaking with voters how important that issue is. This was the 2-year anniversary this week of the Dobbs decision, and it's still something that people are talking about. So that is an area of strength for Democrats to come out on. But Trump, it almost appeared very calm in that exchange where he said, it belongs to the states. Everybody's talking about it. Everybody wants it that way. And it's those type of statements where, voters who may not be following this, may not be reading about the sentiment of a lot of Americans, may not realize that there are a lot of people who don't want that or just don't generalize the issue that Trump categorized it. So there were moments like that just stand out to me where Trump was really able to rely on the fact that a lot of the things from his administration are sort of going back in history, and people just aren't remembering them as well. However, they did occur, and even if he is saying they didn't occur in the ways they did, they did. And again, it's just forcing American people to do their homework. And also, I'm not sure that, you know, we talk about the double unhappies, if they're any more happier or unhappy tonight. This debate may not have given us a very clear picture of where this is going and where voter sentiment is right now.
James, did we get a clear picture of where this is going tonight?
I think in a close election, this is going to be bad for Joe Biden. I mean, the split screen was bad. Biden looked down a lot, which kind of made it look like he was holding his head. I think he was just looking at the podium. I don't think he fully understood sort of how that would look. Trump projected confidence and certitude even as he was making these false statements. He was clearly more prepared than his team let on, where they were kind of pretending like he wasn't taking preparation seriously. Clearly, he actually had spent a lot of time practicing those lines. There were times where Biden sounded over-prepared. Early on, when he was talking about abortion, he tried to bring in immigration, and it seemed like they had rehearsed this line during debate prep, and it just didn't really make sense. It was sort of hard to follow. Even some of the zingers that were clearly intended to be like headlines, Biden stepped on his own lines. I thought one of the best lines of the night was, "You have the morals of an alley cat." And Trump had the kind of wild quote for a former president to say in a debate, which was, "I did not have sex with a porn star." But Biden sort of stumbled on what should have been a great soundbite for him.
I actually had to ask you, what did he just say? Because I didn't get it.
It was
I was
hard
not sure what.
He was sort of mumbling a fair amount. And I mean, even Dana Bash asks head on about his age. This is the #1 concern of voters, and it's going to be more so after this debate. And Biden kind of starts talking about industrial policy and chips and fabs. He did not clear the threshold of satisfying independent swing voters that he has the energy and the stamina to finish the job and serve 4 more years.
Rhonda, one thing that happened tonight was Trump was able to dodge answering questions he did not want to answer, and nobody held him to it. The moderators gave him the floor again to try, sort of double down sometimes to say, here's the question, what's your answer? But he did not answer a question about mass deportation, something he has, as Jam has talked about, said he would do, repeatedly said he would do. He also didn't ask about acknowledging and honoring a Palestinian state, just never answered that. There were moments where he was able to really control the conversation. Was Biden able to do any of that in his own way as well?
Well, this is also how you can see both of these candidates as different as they are, that we know them to be. One is a conventional candidate who's been around for decades, who probably prepared for this in some familiar ways to him. The other one is more off the cuff and will, as you described, kind of drive it where he wants to go and is less predictable. So in that way, you were able to sort of see the split screen of how they handle it. Biden stuck to the question at hand, and oftentimes you would see Trump deflect or go to a question that was asked 2 questions ago and bring in his answer to that. And it was also funny, too, when you saw the graphic at the bottom that said the actual question that the moderator had asked Trump. Oftentimes, it was not the question he was even talking about. So we did see that a lot, and I think that just speaks to how these are 2 very, very different candidates. And of course, most Americans, the world knows that, but that was certainly on display in the ways that they handled each question.
Let's play some tape from tonight. President Biden had several shaky moments, including this moment where he did appear to lose his train of thought. Let's watch.
We'd be able to wipe out his debt. We'd be able to help make sure that all those things we need to do, child care, elder care, making sure that we continue to strengthen our health care system, making sure that we're able to make every single solitary person eligible for what I've been able to do with the COVID. With dealing with everything we have to do with. Look, if we finally beat Medicare.
Thank you, President Biden. President Trump?
So that was a moment from the debate tonight. Really, it's almost less of a train of thought loss and more of a word loss, right? Like he's trying to retrieve something that he's been practicing on and saying a lot, James, but he just couldn't quite catch it.
Totally. Normally, it's worth saying that the president, and Trump did this too, he has note cards and he's often reading off of note cards. And tonight he didn't have any notes in front of him. He had a blank piece of paper. He clearly has spent all week at Camp David practicing these 2-minute answers, and he had a lot of ideas. It happens to everyone, but that he wanted to get across. I think what he was trying to say there at the end was that he took on pharma and capped the price of insulin, but he was mixing up his words. Some of it is that he has a stutter, but in this case, he clearly was, I think, over-prepared. He was trying to say too much, and then he sort of had this brain freeze, and Trump capitalized on it. The other problem for Biden is that it happened early in the debate, and it sort of set this tone that he kind of was out of his depth, a little bit of a deer in the headlights, and that's when my phone started blowing up with prominent Democrats saying, what the heck is going on? This is a disaster for us.
JM.
I mean, Democrats are clearly concerned about Biden's performance, especially in the first part of the debate tonight. I think to James's point, it became very apparent, I think, it's, speculation here, but I think it became very apparent that he was almost over-prepared in a sense. And from what I could observe, it seemed like he was also thrown off a bit by the format of the debate, especially in the early going, the mics. I think that the Biden the muting of the mics, the time limits, I think that what is ironic in some ways about that is that the Biden campaign requested this debate, and the two campaigns negotiated the rules, the parameters of this debate, so they knew how things were going to be changed. And as you mentioned in the early part of the show, James, there was a theory of the case, which I think played out tonight, which was actually that the mic muting worked out better for Trump. Totally. There was a conventional wisdom, I think, in the weeks leading up that this was going to be better for Biden because of how much Trump interrupted Biden in that first debate in 2020. And Trump folks said, no, he's going to come in and he's going to kind of play it even keel. He's not going to interrupt. And we mostly saw that tonight, aside from kind of the tail end of the debate. But I think that the muting of the mics, the kind of exchanges actually created kind of awkward situations for Biden, someone who over the years has actually been a pretty good debater, but is someone who's fed off the crowds, because most times debates have crowds, have audiences, have those applause lines. So as much as we talked about how Trump loves to feed off of those applause lines, it was actually in some ways Biden who seemed to need those more tonight.
Let's play one moment that worked for Biden, because he did try to take a couple swings at President Trump. And here's one of the barbs that came from Biden. Now, this was about 25 minutes in, so it was not off the top by any means.
My son spent a year in Iraq, living right next to one of those burn pits, came back with stage 4 glioblastoma. I was recently in France for D-Day, and I spoke all about those heroes that died. I went to the World War II cemetery, World War I cemetery he refused to go to. He was standing with his 4-star general, and he told me, he said, I don't want to go in there because they're a bunch of losers and suckers. My son was not a loser, was not a sucker. You're the sucker. You're the loser.
Moment from Biden tonight where he directly addressed Donald Trump and turned to him to deliver that line. Let's bring in our colleague Aaron Blake, who's covering all of this. He's the author of the Campaign Moments newsletter and also does a podcast on the Washington Post feed that you can catch. Aaron, a lot of people want to know who won and who lost the debate. So how do you frame it and think of it in terms of key takeaways and moments that worked and moments that didn't?
Yeah, I think that it's evident that Democrats are panicking after this. I think we're seeing that in some of the responses that we're getting, the very early responses. I was struck in particular by the comments on CNN from Kate Bedingfield, who was White House communications director in the Biden administration, basically calling this a disaster. Certainly other pundits have been pretty transparent from the left about how they feel this went. I don't think that they can really put a good face on it, and they're not really even trying at this point. And so I don't think there was a whole lot about the debate that was very surprising, but it kind of confirmed people's fears in a lot of ways. This was a moment that kind of took the Democratic Party that has been trying to look past this issue and argue that it's not so bad and that Biden's age is some kind of a media construct. They'll point to all the stories that are written about this issue and complain that this is being built up into something that it's not. And then you see a situation like this where Biden actually takes the stage, and we see why the American people had these concerns in the first place. And so I think that's obviously the big takeaway here. I do think Biden had some decent moments when he was talking about democracy, when he brought up Trump's criminal cases. Trump didn't stand by a lot of his more extreme proposals, like pardoning January 6th defendants, including mass deportations, things like that. But these were isolated moments in the debate that were lost in the shuffle. Biden was not able to drive a message. He was not able to counter Trump in a way that Trump needs to be countered because of the many false things that he says. And that really allowed this debate to be all about Joe Biden in a way that the Biden campaign certainly wouldn't have wanted it to be.
Aaron, let's talk about Donald Trump. He lied repeatedly tonight. The lies mostly went unchecked. Biden didn't seem to be able to counter them quickly enough or aggressively enough to prove them wrong. So how did Trump do tonight?
Yeah, I think your point about the fact-checking is important. This is something that the debate moderators decided wasn't their position to do that in this debate. We could have a debate about whether that's a good thing or not. Part of the reason I suspect that they don't want to do that is because it's a very difficult thing to do. To have a grasp of all these facts ahead of time is not easy to do. You risk going too far in fact-checking somebody by saying something is false when it's maybe a little bit of a situation where it's debatable. But I think what really happened here was Trump would have been in a position where those things might have hurt him more had Biden been in a better position to fact-check those things, had Biden been able to counter them in some way. It was really left to Biden to be able to do that. And because he kind of struggled through this debate, he had his preparation, but he wasn't able to kind of joust with Trump in a whole lot of ways. These claims went unchallenged. I don't think it was a hugely strong debate performance from Donald Trump. He is who he always is, which is saying the same things over and over again. Many of them are false. But the idea that that's something that the American people would come away from this debate with, I think is pretty far-fetched at this point. That really wasn't driven home because Biden wasn't able to drive it home. And so that'll be a focus of some of the coverage here, as it should be. But that's not going to be what most Americans saw from this debate.
It's an important way to frame it and think about it. Thank you, Aaron. Let's bring Rhonda back into this conversation to get a sense of what the atmosphere is like down there in Atlanta post-debate. Rhonda.
Yeah, the room is filling up. The spin room is below me, and I've just seen a few surrogates for both candidates pass by me. I just saw Senator Tim Scott, who was mentioned by Trump he was one of the only people who was in the VP stakes mentioned by the former president in this debate. I also saw Senator Raphael Warnock. Of course, he's the U.S. Senator from Georgia. He's here for Biden. So all of them are kind of getting in position to talk to reporters on the floor, tell them what they thought of the night. We know from what we're hearing from the Democrat side is it's going to be a little bit more structured, where the surrogates will spend a short amount of time with reporters, nothing extended. But they were here before the debate, too. We talked about how we saw Gavin Newsom spend a lot of time, make a lot of rounds with reporters. Byron Donalds was here as well earlier on behalf of the former President Trump. But right now, it does feel like a subdued spin room. I've been to a few of these in my career, and it does seem a bit quiet. I think everyone is still having a sense of how to figure out what just happened. Of course, both sides of surrogates are going to try to convince media and the public that their man won tonight. But I think we're going to be unpacking this type of debate for a while. And again, it is a few months before the election. Really anything can happen. But I do think everyone's trying to figure out where we're going from here.
Rhonda, talk to us more about Donald Trump's performance. Aaron had some really interesting thoughts there about what people take away from debates. And even though Trump lied repeatedly, if Americans aren't keyed into that because they're focused on Biden's performance, does it end up just being a successful night for Trump?
you know, that could be the way that this plays out. We'll see. We can monitor some of the polling that might come out in the coming days if there was an uptick for Trump or a downtick or uptick for Biden. But we'll have to see what the American sentiment is on this debate. One thing about Trump is that, and we are very familiar with this as we've covered him for the last few years, when he speaks in generalizations, when he speaks and says things like everyone knows it, everybody's saying, you wonder what effect that does have on voters who may not be as read in to some of the things that he is lying about. So, you know, again, this is a part of why this election has made so many people unhappy, is because they're just not convinced on either candidate. You know, again, all the questions we're asking right now do remain to be seen and how voters are going to take this away. Of course, there will be another shot at this, as we think, in September when they debate again. But you know, right now, it does appear that if you were just looking at the optics of tonight, there was the issue of age with with President Biden, and there was the issue of the former president being, you know, classically the candidate that we do know him to be as someone who is going to sprinkle in mistruths and generalizations that are hard to fact check in real time.
Aaron, let's talk about what happens next. As Rhonda said, there is a planned debate for September, although who knows really what's going to happen in the coming months. We don't yet know who Trump will select as his vice presidential running mate. There is some chatter among Democrats about whether or not Biden is really up to do this job. And the nominating convention is the time when you really lock in and solidify who the nominee is. Talk to us about what is to come in the coming weeks and 4.5 months.
Yeah, obviously the Trump VP pick is going to be a big moment. I think in the immediate term, it's going to be about how much kind of bedwetting we see from the Democratic Party about this. You're right that this is, we are before the Democratic National Convention. Neither of these candidates have actually been nominated yet. I think it's pretty far-fetched to think that Democrats would be able to turn the page at this point. There is a reason that Democrats had stuck with President Biden for all this time, and it's not just because they were reluctant to believe that he had problems. And the actual process of replacing him on the ballot would get very messy. Think about how that would go down. Would you go with Vice President Harris? Would you try to get somebody else in there, skipping over the first black vice president of the United States? It's just something that I have a hard time seeing Democrats really have an appetite for unless they have decided that this is just a lost cause at this point. And we have seen at this point that the American people have very major concerns about Biden's age, but the race is still rather close in the key states. And so I would expect that they're going to see how things play out over the next few days. They're going to look at some of the polling, see if things have really changed all that much, and then they'll decide whether or not they need to do some kind of other thing, whether that's at the convention or some other kind of course correction with the Biden campaign. But right now, it's clear that this is an issue that's not going away for them, and they have to start talking about it a little bit more earnestly.
Aaron Blake, thank you so much. A reporter here at the Washington Post, also the author of the Campaign Moment newsletter. Thank you, Aaron. Well, Trump went on the offensive tonight repeatedly. At one point, he attacked Biden for not saying the words Trump became famous for. Those words are, "You're fired." Let's watch.
He doesn't fire people. He never fired people. I've never seen him fire anybody. I did fire a lot. I fired Comey because he was no good. I fired a lot of the top people at the FBI, drained the swamp. They were no good. Not easy to fire people. You'd pay a price for it, but they were no good. I inherited these people. I didn't put them there. I didn't put Comey there. He was no good. I fired him. This guy hasn't fired anybody. He never fires. He should have fired every military man that was involved with that the Afghanistan horror show, the most embarrassing moment in the history of our country. He didn't fire. Did you fire anybody? Did you fire anybody that's on the border that's allowed us to have the worst border in the history of the world? Did anybody get fired for allowing 18 million people, many from prisons, many from mental institutions? Did you fire anybody that allowed our country to be destroyed? Joe, our country is being destroyed as you and I sit up here and waste a lot of time on this debate.
All right, that's a clip from earlier tonight. James.
This is a classic example of Trump taking something that is a weakness and a liability, which is that there was utter chaos during his administration, that there was huge levels of turnover, that he was constantly, he was nominating all these people that he was subsequently firing, whether it was his attorney general or his chief of staff. And he's spinning that into, I held people accountable. And similarly on immigration, the 18 million numbers is wildly inaccurate. But he's then pivoting to an issue where he is politically strong. And I think people won't remember what was said. They'll remember how they felt. And Trump sounded forceful. He sounded strong. And Democrats are going to rally behind their standard bearer. Donald Trump is deeply unpopular. The majority of Americans don't have a favorable view of him. I don't think that this is going to make people all of a sudden like Trump better coming out of this debate. But it does, I think Trump's performance and Biden's performance mean that neither side is going to be able to make this solely a referendum on the other candidate. This really is going to be a choice election where voters are going to have to weigh the clear weaknesses of both major party nominees.
JM, final thoughts from you tonight.
Going into this, the dynamic, this has been a remarkably static race. Trump has a ceiling issue, Biden has an enthusiasm issue. Did that dynamic change tonight? That was sort of the key question. Can they alter the trajectory of the race? We don't know. We're going to know more in the coming days and weeks here, but there's a lot of time left. There's another debate on the schedule, at least at this point. There's 2 conventions. We're over 4 months away from the general election. Polling in June is not indicative of what's going to happen in November. And I think I think polling is important, but I think it's important to drive home for our viewers that polling in June is not predictive necessarily of what's going to happen in November.
It's a snapshot in time.
It's a snapshot in time. This was a bad night for Biden, but Trump did not respond. Trump did not have a good debate. He just had a better debate than Biden. So this is, I think there's just a lot of story left to be told here, and we live in an extremely hyper-polarized time. So maybe 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago, a really bad debate performance may have sunk a candidate's chances with no chance for them to come back and recover from that. I'm not sure whether that's the situation we're in now, just given the underlying dynamics of this race. So I think it's really a wait and see at this point to see what comes out in the days and weeks ahead here of what impact this debate does or doesn't have.
Let's go to Atlanta and Rhonda Colvin, who has been there on the scene, reporting live from the spin room. Rhonda, as we prepare to close up shop tonight on this live coverage, really this historic debate, what are your final thoughts this evening?
Yeah, I believe JM also touched on this as well. The thing that I am thinking about a lot right now is what's happening today does not decide what might be happening in November. We know as journalists that what the story is today may not be the story tomorrow or next week. So it's hard to say if the performances by both candidates did anything for their campaigns right now that will help decide who wins the election in November. So again, it's our job as reporters to find out how voters are feeling about this right now and see where this goes. But there is a long time, especially in the news cycle we've all been living in, a long time between now and Election Day. So we'll see what Republicans make of this, what Democrats make of it, but most importantly, what American voters feel about it in the coming days.
All right. Thank you so much, Rhonda. Well, there is a lot of story yet to be told, in the words of my colleague, J.M. Rieger, and we will be here to tell it and witness it with you. This has been live coverage from the Washington Post of CNN's presidential debate, the earliest ever televised general election debate. Thanks to Rhonda and our team in Atlanta, as well as James, JM, and all of our campaign reporters. We will be live in 2 weeks as Donald Trump is sentenced in New York for his convictions of falsifying business records. And we'll also be live covering the Republican and Democratic national conventions later on this summer. Find us on the Washington Post homepage and on YouTube. Look for the Washington Post. I'm Libby Casey. Have a good night.
Mother Teresa could not beat these charges.
Welcome to the Trump Trials Sidebar, a new podcast from the Washington Post. Hi, I'm Libby Casey, and every week, alongside Rhonda Colvin and James Hohman, we break down the latest news and legal battles as Donald Trump ramps up his presidential campaign. The ramifications are serious.
The first time a U.S. president is in court as a defendant.
But we also have some fun. So, Rhonda, if you could have any job in the court other than journalist, what would it be?
I would enjoy being the bailiff.
Nobody messes with the bailiff.
No one, you've never read a story about someone messing with the bailiff.
Our colleagues share their inside scoops. Do you have a sense that the jury has that weight bearing on them?
And they see all of us. They know that they're a part of history.
And stick around to get real. What are some of the weird nuggets and things you've learned about jurors this week?
There was a guy talking about his public access TV show.
Watch the Trump Trials Sidebar on YouTube or listen to us on your favorite podcast platform today.